Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. Good evening, everyone. My name is Rachel. I'm 29 years old, and it took me 3 years to find the courage to put this story on paper. It happened in 2022 at an isolated ranch in rural New Mexico. Even now, living far away, I still wake up at midnight with the feeling that sweet perfume is about to drift through my bedroom door. I was a newly graduated nurse, running from a violent relationship. After 4 years of hidden bruises masked by apologies, I packed my things into a canvas duffel bag and ran to the Greyhound station in Santa Fe. I needed to disappear from my ex's radar, and the proposal from a home care agency sounded like Providence itself. Room, board, advance pay, and peace in exchange for caring for Octavio, an 82-year-old widower partially paralyzed. It's remote, but it's quiet, the HR woman assured me. Quiet. Back then, that word sounded like medicine. Today, it seems like a cruel joke. I arrived on a February afternoon, my arms sticky against my shirt, my head pounding under the humid dome that is the New Mexican sky during monsoon season. Octavio's daughter, Alina, picked me up on a dirt road, and we bounced for almost an hour between pastures, scrubland, and marshes. At every turn, the truck's floorboards creaked. I prayed the tire wouldn't sink into the mud. When the pickup stopped in front of the house, I felt like I'd gone back 2 decades. Dark wood, high veranda, kerosene lanterns hanging from hooks, radio antenna tied to a bamboo pole. Cell signal here is a legend, Alina announced, tucking her sweaty hair behind her forehead. But you get used to it. After a few days, the silence becomes your friend. Silence was never my strength. Silence is noise you can't understand. Still, I nodded. I met Mr. Octavio, paper-thin skin, cloudy white eyes, face marked by broken vessels. He could only move his right arm and head. When he saw me, he smiled crookedly and whispered, "Isabel, did you come back?" I explained that my name was Rachel, the new caregiver. He blinked slowly, insisting, "Isabel, my flower." I attributed it to age, early Alzheimer's, according to the report. I settled into a small room at the back, board walls that let in wind, voices, and later, other things. My routine started before dawn. Get up, light the wood stove, boil water, thicken corn addle with brown sugar and cinnamon, sprinkle epizote, change diapers, turn Octavio's body to prevent bed sores, clean pink wounds, then watery coffee for myself. The battery radio tuned to the national hour, pretending I had company. Between tasks, I walked around the property, twisted mango trees, a loaded soursop tree, a reddish stream that smelled like sweet iron. Sometimes a group of howler monkeys screamed in the distance. Other times, coyotes crossed through the brush. All of that should have been calming, but the gap between those sounds reminded me that if something went wrong, no one would hear. In the second week, the first strange thing happened. It was high noon, the sun turning the veranda into a clay oven, and I was changing the old man's sheet. Suddenly, the room filled with a sickly sweet perfume, a mix of burnt caramel, jasmine, and cheap alcohol. It was so thick, I felt the air sticky on my skin. I looked around, no bottles, no flowers. I opened the window, the smell didn't fade. Octavio opened his eyes, smiled like a child caught in mischief, and whispered, "Isabel came to take care of me." I answered that my name was Rachel, but he continued, "Isabel, my flower. She's happy when she smells like herself." I pretended not to hear. It wasn't the first time an elderly person projected memories onto their caregiver, but the smell stuck in my throat all day. In the third week, the perfume became a punctual visitor. It arrived daily, almost always between 2 and 3 in the afternoon, when the heat pounded the roof. I could mark it on my biological clock. First, the metal sheet would crack, then the air would ripple. Finally, the room would turn into a candy box. In those moments, Don Octavio would laugh, staring at a fixed point, always the same one, as if someone were standing there. It still wasn't terror, just discomfort. We're made to live with smells, coffee, wet concrete, burnt plastic. But when a smell has no origin, it becomes a threat. I started sniffing around the room like a bloodhound. I checked the dresser, nightstand, curtains. On top of the wardrobe, protected by a yellowed crocheted tablecloth, I found a small velvet box. Inside, thick glass bottle, peeling golden label, parfum belle, sweet garden. Empty. Yet it gave off the same aroma that suffocated me every afternoon. I kept the discovery, thinking about asking the family. The opportunity came in the 4th week. Alina came with her brother Antonio, bringing cans and diapers. I showed them the bottle. It still smells. The two looked at each other. Antonio shrugged. Must be left from the previous girl. Isabel, his sister completed, rolling the syllable like someone tasting thorns. She fell from the veranda, died instantly. Dad never got over it. I wanted to know more, but they changed the subject, stacked the groceries, and left in a hurry. Hours later, when hanging my hammock in the living room for a nap, I noticed they had left the door ajar. Maybe on purpose. To this day, I don't know if it was carelessness or intention. The next night I woke up drenched. Full moon reflected in the stream, and a whisper of very light steps made the flooring outside my room groan. I thought of a puma, a badger, whatever could swallow me. I got up, grabbed the lantern, and opened the door. I saw a female silhouette crossing the living room, light dress clinging to wet skin, hair dripping over her face. She was barefoot, but each step sounded like she was wearing shoes. And the perfume was almost solid, pushing the air. I held my breath. The lantern trembled in my hand. The woman stopped at Octavio's door, touched the handle, and turned her face toward me. I didn't see features, only the outline of a thin smile, someone recognizing something dear. In that instant, everything went out like a candle in the wind. I ran to the old man's room. He was sleeping peacefully, but his right hand was gripping nothing, fingers intertwined around nothing. The pillowcase smelled like sweet garden. At dawn, I thought about leaving. I packed my backpack, started the old truck the family had left. The engine half-turned and died. I tried again, nothing. When I got out, the rain started. Hot drops, mud up to the axles, the swollen stream. I was trapped. Every thunder mocked my escape attempt. Trapped, I did what every stubborn nurse does, read papers. I rummaged through drawers and found old insurance folders, prescriptions, electric bills. At the bottom of the last drawer, a manila envelope held with rubber band. Inside, wrinkled clippings. Caregiver dies in fall, domestic accident shocks community. Photos showed the facade, yellow tape on the veranda, a body under a sheet on the grass. Among the clippings, an incomplete copy of the police report. suspicion of push, divergent testimonies. Investigation suspended for lack of evidence. It was torn right at the part that listed suspects' names. I felt dizzy. I went outside to escape violence and entered a place where it was impregnated like mold. First impulse, call the police. But the crackling radio announced there would be no signal. Second impulse, confront the family. Cowardly, I chose to wait. The smell returned stronger that afternoon, but it didn't come alone. While changing the old man's catheter, I noticed purple marks on his wrist, like fingers dug in. He was crying, repeating, "I didn't want to. It was Alina who." Until then, he hadn't connected names with facts. Grabbing my blouse, he begged me not to let her take him away. The air became so thick, I felt nauseous. That's when academic vocabulary gave way to raw fear. Ghost. The point of no return came in the 5th week, in the blackest hour before dawn. A scream tore me from my hammock. I ran, opened Octavio's door. He was half sitting, supported by his good arm, staring at the ceiling where a dark stain was forming like a soot cloud. Within it, the face of the woman I had seen in the living room outlined itself, livid mouth, sunken but fixed eyes. The stain descended and floated over the old man, who screamed mixed names. Isabel, Flower, Child, forgive me. The lantern flickered, the flame almost died. I smelled kerosene mixed with perfume. My legs buckled, but I had to act. If he fell and fractured something, it would be my fault. I plunged my arm into the icy cloud, touched his shoulder, pulled. The sensation was like putting my arm in a bucket of cold water despite the heat. The shadow retreated and dissolved near the window. Everything lasted seconds, but the room remained impregnated with the smell for hours. With the milky light of morning, I decided to collect evidence. I took the old cassette recorder that kept religious songs, inserted a blank tape I always carry, I'm nostalgic, and sat next to the patient. Don Octavio, what happened to Isabel? He cried, hesitated, and spoke. The girl wanted to report. She said she would go to town to tell the head nurse how they treated me. Alina got angry. She ordered Antonio to scare her. I pushed gently, just to frighten her. She lost her balance, hit the edge. So much blood. The confession came out splattered with tears and coughs. I recorded everything. When I pressed stop, a wind from nowhere slammed the door. The perfume vanished. Looking at the tape still spinning, I felt like I had in my hand a rope pulling something from under the mud. After years, I spent day and night watching the road, hoping to see headlights. But another storm fell. I consumed the last candles, split wet wood, lived on crackers and cold coffee. The old man slept. I barely closed my eyes, going over the plan. Deliver tape and report, even if walking to the municipal seat. The rain stopped at dawn on the 7th day after the confession. The sky opened like apologizing. I decided to try the truck. After half an hour draining gasoline from the generator, the engine started with a groan. I kept the tape in the inner pocket of my uniform, closed the house door. Then I noticed the veranda clean, without cracks. The exact spot where Isabel fell shone differently, like freshly polished wood, and no trace of perfume. I swallowed saliva and left. 25 miles later, I reached the police station of a small town. The secretary looked at me like I was bringing a UFO, but accepted the tape. An investigator accompanied me to the ranch the next day. He found Isabel's torn nightgown inside the closet, stained with brown blood. He also found the perfume bottle cap, broken thread, everything sent for expert analysis. They also located a medical report indicating contusion on the wrist compatible with grabbing someone before falling. They couldn't ignore it. Alina and Antonio claimed innocence. They said I was seeking money, but the recording was analyzed, declared authentic. The judge ordered Octavio to be hospitalized while awaiting hearing. It never took place. He died of pneumonia 2 months later. The family appealed. The matter got tangled. My statement was taken by video, far from there. End of process for me. I almost returned to Santa Fe. I rented a room near the university, tried to resume life. For a while, everything was normal, but the perfume sometimes appeared in unlikely places. Bank line, hospital hallway where I worked later, bus at a stop. It lasted a few seconds, enough to freeze my neck. They say olfactory memory is the most persistent. Maybe it's a simple explanation. I prefer to believe it. In September 2024, I entered a thrift store in Espanola looking for a lamp. On a dusty shelf, I immediately recognized the bottle Parfum Belle, Sweet Garden. Full, cap intact. Touching the glass, I felt a slight vibration, like a discreet pulse. I stepped away. The seller commented that the lot came from an estate inventory inherited house near Espanola. Nostalgia became nausea. I left without looking back. I never returned to that store, but I still feel, from time to time, the perfume mounting the back of some thought. Whether it's warning, complaint, or just my conscience ruminating, I don't know. I learned that no one is really alone when they choose isolation. The past always finds a way. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a smell too sweet to be natural. I tell you this because if you're thinking of hiding from the world on some dirt road, be careful. Solitude echoes the ghosts that already exist and invites others to enter. And if on a sweltering afternoon you perceive a perfume without a bottle, remember me. It's not a pleasant memory or advertisement, it's danger announcing presence. Run while the road remains firm. I ran, and for now, I survived. I don't know if everyone will have the same luck. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. Good evening. My name is Lydia. I'm 35 years old, but if you followed my social media, you'd think I was stuck at 25. I always played with filters, angles, and lighting, but I never outright lied until I realized that a large part of my work depended on looking eternally young. The beauty industry is cruel. Every morning, a girl 10 years younger appears showing miraculous results. I entered that game and never looked back. It began at the start of this past winter, on a freezing Monday night in Seattle, Washington. Pacific wind hammered the mirrored windows of my newly delivered apartment. I was recording stories about an expensive mask, while the new building's plumbing noise rumbled like a muffled drum. That's when I opened the message from a certain profile, no photo, 0 posts, only followed women in my niche. It wrote, "You age because you follow magazine tricks. Accept trying something real." I liked the boldness and responded with a laughing emoji. I immediately received a recipe for gentle peeling. Red clay, 4 drops of seawater in oil, and a mantra whispered 3 times in front of the reflection at dawn. It seemed like mystical spam, but the promise of vitrified skin intrigued me. That dawn, after editing a video until almost 2 in the morning, I reread the message. I felt exhausted. The ring light was still on, smell of reheated coffee in the kitchenette. I noted the clay on my shopping list, turned everything off, and went to sleep with moving boxes still scattered in the hallway. No one greeted each other. We were stacked islands. The routine continued the same. The following week, I filmed morning routine drinking coffee on the balcony, though the cold wind burned my throat. I edited sponsorships, responded to haters who said my neck betrayed 30, and many more. I smiled, but the bathroom mirror, illuminated by the ceiling's cold light, showed lines. No filter, erased 100%. Tension pulsed at the base of my skull. It was as if each new like brought a tick, pulling my skin backward. Friday, I bought the ingredients. The girl at the health store commented that this clay opened the soul's pores. I laughed to not seem skeptical. It was past 11 at night when I mixed everything in a glass jar. The oil had a translucent greenish tone and gave off a sweet, seaweed smell. I propped my phone against the bathroom mirror and recorded the process, ready to publish it the next day if it worked. I whispered the mantra 3 times, quietly, embarrassed by my own voice. I reflect the image I desire. I return what I don't need. It sounded silly, but the fluorescent light flickered a second, as if agreeing. I finished, rinsed my face, and checked the phone screen. The skin looked normal. I stored the jar, closed the blinds, and collapsed into bed. I woke early, still dark, on Saturday. Turning on the lamp, I saw small, transparent pieces on the pillow, like dry plastic. I ran my hand over my forehead, felt a smooth, freshly polished surface. I ran to the bathroom. My reflection shone delicately, as if a porcelain filter were installed in real time. The fine lines around my eyes had disappeared. I photographed in RAW without presets. The result had the same creamy luminosity, impossible to fake. Then in Lightroom, my heart accelerated. But vanity weighed more than the strange. I should have stopped there. I published a carousel with caption about holistic self-care. Comments exploded. What app gave you that blur? Perfect skin. I gained thousands of new followers. To satisfy curiosity, I promised a tutorial if the post reached 10,000 likes. It achieved it in less than 12 hours. I grew by feeding the hunger for perfection, and in return, I felt anxiety become nausea. In the second application, I noticed something uncomfortable. While recording, the clay absorbed heat, burned when cleaning it. Another layer of skin came off, now in larger strips. It didn't hurt, but seeing my own dermis come out like rice paper activated a primitive alarm. I observed that even without repeating the mantra, the skin kept peeling, as if the mirror had memorized the formula. Still, the camera showed an impeccable face without redness. It was as if the lens chose an improved version of me. I edited the video, but noticed that in frames where skin peeled off, nothing appeared except intact, smooth surface. It seemed like spontaneous post-production magic. I spent 2 days between lives, sponsorships, and a strange dizziness that came every time the sea breeze blew. Maybe the smell got seasick mixed with the oil. I slept little, woke at 4 with itching under my nightgown. I ran to the mirror and collected more translucent flakes for the trash. I started keeping them in a zip bag without knowing why. Maybe to prove to myself I wasn't crazy. That's when I sought concrete proof. I called Marcus, photographer from my first sessions. He brought neutral lighting, measured light saturation, everything. He photographed in highest definition. Seeing the laptop screen, he opened his eyes wide. There's no post-production that achieves this. Even zooming in, the pores are too uniform. It looks like a plastic render. I showed him the bag with skin strips. He swallowed, but suggested I see a dermatologist. I laughed. No doctor prescribes mantras. I asked for discretion and dismissed him. That night, something changed. While removing the mask, the neighboring building's light reflected a silhouette standing on the solar panels of the top floor, 3 levels up. Those penthouse windows were always empty. There were no tenants yet. The figure resembled a thin woman, shoulder-length hair, head tilted, evaluating me. I blinked and it disappeared. I blamed fatigue. I decided to investigate that mysterious profile. It remained empty, but I discovered it followed deactivated accounts of influencers I'd met at events years ago. I remembered rumors about one of them disappearing, Isabella, who stopped posting and vanished from WhatsApp. I entered closed forums, found an old thread with story captures where she showed glass skin identical to mine weeks before disappearing. My stomach froze. Someone there said Isabella was seen in La Paz without a phone, head shaved, not talking to anyone. The source was doubtful, but fear dug its nails in. I could have blocked the account. Instead, I demanded explanations. What is this recipe? Why is my skin peeling? I received a backwards audio, unintelligible, as if spoken from back to front. I made the childish mistake of inverting the file in an editor. I heard my own voice whispering. With each change, more reflection, less body. I threw the phone, breathed the icy air entering through the half-open window. The night smelled like salt and fresh concrete from the building's common areas. In the mirror, I noticed my eyes slightly clearer, a green I never had. I touched my face, cold, without human texture. The camera on the tripod blinked alone and took a photo. For days, I avoided repeating the ritual, but I woke with skin peeling anyway, as if it happened alone during sleep. The clay jar dried and cracked. However, luminance kept increasing. I went to the dermatologist. Under clinical light, my dermis showed bleeding microfissures. In the control photo, nothing except mirrored surface. He spoke of photodermatitis, prescribed ointment, and requested studies. I left feeling like a cracked hologram. Neighbors began to notice. The doorman, kind gentleman who broke the building's ice, commented, "Miss Lydia, you look like a shop window doll, you know." I smiled, but a chill ran through me. He stared at my cheeks without blinking. In the glass reflection of the booth, I saw again that silhouette behind me, same angle as the previous night. When I turned, nothing. I returned to the apartment and covered mirrors with sheets. It was useless. Lit screens reflected my polished image. Even the teapot water showed a crystalline face. I tried to destroy the jar, but the instant it shattered, a crack ran through the pipes, and I heard the mantra resonate like Gregorian chant. I slept less and less. My body thinned because chewing caused gum bleeding. Between lives, I collected skin pieces, now pink, thicker, like old rubber peel. They came out painlessly, but left raw flesh that appeared intact to the camera. Followers climbed in cascade. Big brands started requesting budgets. August 26, 2024. Dawn of violent Pacific wind. The living room light flickered. The hallway mirror trembled like water. I felt stabs in my scalp, and entire locks slid through my fingers, smooth, rootless. I opened the app, maybe ask for help, but the buttons recorded alone. My voice came out metallic, repeating the mantra in loop. I saw myself speak without moving my lips. It was the silhouette using my body as microphone. Notifications exploded. Best skincare live of the year. Hot tears fell, but in the video, only healthy shine appeared. Then, as if the algorithm possessed itself, my profile sent private messages with the recipe to other influencers. I recognized Julia's name, 19-year-old girl going viral. I tried to delete, but the phone froze. I heard steps in the hallway, though the building was empty at that hour. The door slammed without wind. A rancid seaweed smell flooded the environment. The camera turned toward me and captured the instant when a complete layer of my face peeled off, revealing dark red tissue. I screamed. I heard my scream, but in the audio there was only silence. The live showed a perfect face smiling without any wound. Hundreds of little hearts flew across the screen. The next morning, I woke on the cold bathroom floor, skin stuck to the tile like a wet label. I tried entering my networks. User not found. I searched my name, no mention except generic reposts. That account that had written me no longer followed me, but now followed Julia. I sat on the balcony, wind cutting exposed flesh. I saw my image in the glass of the opposite building, smooth skin, perfect hair, calm smile. A second reflection materialized behind. The shadow woman tilted her head, approving the new phase. With what little voice remained, I pleaded to the void. Take what you want, but give me back. The answer came only in the creaking of blinds. Saturday, already September. I saw Julia's story. Brilliant skin, caption New Era Skincare. I hugged my own knees, feeling flesh stick together, and finally understood the trade was complete. I remained barely as living remains in a building where no one noticed the smell of dried blood. My reflection, now autonomous, kept generating perfect content, signing contracts, and passing the recipe. I no longer know how to distinguish artificial intelligence from apparition. I write for you because I follow your channel from the beginning, and know you treat these accounts seriously. If you receive this email, believe me. Delete any message promising instant miracles. If the photo seems too good to be real, flee. There are still particles of my skin scattered in the apartment corners, and each one shines like fish scale under the moon. I fear that when the right wind blows, they'll fly to someone's balcony and everything will start again. If you hear whispers coming from the mirror at dawn, don't repeat them. If you see a still woman in the reflection of solar panels, close your eyes. And for the love I still keep for my ancient version, if an empty account offers you gentle peeling, block it. Please block it. Good evening. My name is Augustus. I'm 48 years old, and I need to share something that still steals my sleep almost every dawn. In 2021, when all this began, I was a logistics manager at a trucking company here in Louisiana. Or at least, I pretended to be. In reality, that suffocating Monday in August, I received a manila envelope at reception with my termination notice. To say I felt defeated would be an understatement. I felt shattered. I went to the company bathroom, washed my face several times, and instead of going straight home, I got in my car. I had bought it at a police auction a month earlier without worrying about its origin, and I drove aimlessly. It was almost noon. Steam rising from the asphalt made the white lines seem liquid. In that instant, I made a cowardly decision: hide the news from my family. Augustus, ex-sergeant who preached discipline to others, no longer had the courage to face my own truth. I did what any proud and disoriented man would do. I parked at a decadent strip mall, one of those that sprouted near the industrial zone when everything seemed to be improving. But today accumulate closed stores and the smell of wet drywall. There I spent the following hours. I walked through the nearly empty food court, ordered reheated shrimp soup, and chewed the sting of habanero pepper while rehearsing an explanation that never came. I returned to the car before the afternoon rain and noticed an uncomfortable detail. The driver's seat gave off a sweet smell of mold mixed with stale sweat, as if I had left a wet shirt there for days. I rolled down the windows. It didn't help. I wiped it with alcohol bought at a everything for $10 store. Nothing. The smell seemed impregnated in the seat foam, as if the car had decided to register my shame. In the following days, my routine became theater. I left before dawn, pretending commitment. I parked at different decadent plazas or on side streets with guard booths. I bought a newspaper, read headlines that no longer made sense, and divided time between the steering wheel and small walks through empty stores. Each return to the car was a punch in the nose, the same smell, maybe stronger. I carried disinfectant bottles, left the air conditioning at maximum, wrapped towels around the seat. Nothing worked. I barely noticed that little by little, the same clothes I wore acquired that trace of mold, so slight no one commented, but I felt it. It was as if the seat became part of my body, or I part of it. It was a Saturday in September when I noticed the first parking ticket on the car floor. The paper had the stamp of the plaza where I had been 2 days before, but showed a future date. September 28th, 2021. I thought the machine had printed wrong and threw it away, opening the passenger door. Monday, another ticket appeared, now with September 30th. The coincidence seemed silly, maybe my fault for sleeping with open eyes. I threw it away again. However, the next morning there were 2 tickets on the seat, one on top of the other, both wrinkled as if someone had pressed them against the fabric. I stared at them too long, and for the first time realized maybe I was suffering some kind of breakdown. Still, I continued the farce. Francine, my wife, trusted me. She believed when I described talks and meetings that didn't exist. Our son Luke, 8 years old, only asked, "Dad, are we going fishing this weekend?" I answered yes, pushing anguish forward like someone sweeping dust under the carpet. The strangeness became real concern the day I left the plaza and returned to the car to find 5 tickets stacked, each with a subsequent date starting October 15th. I tried to tear them up, but my fingers trembled while doing it. I felt a sharp cut on my palm like a paper slash, and dropped the pieces on the mat. In that same instant, the windshield darkened. It wasn't a cloud covering the sun. The glass seemed to condense shadows from inside, and I saw something form like inverted fog drops. I blinked several times until the image took shape. A collision on a wide avenue, a white car invading the opposite lane, crashing into 2 vehicles. I recognized the sign of a store in the background, an establishment near here. The scene faded like someone turning off a projector. The dashboard showed normal time. Traffic around continued. My hands were sweating. There was no cliches, just viscous nausea and childish fear. I drove to that avenue. My whole body protested, but I needed to prove it had been imagination. I pulled over at a gas station, ordered watery coffee, and watched the movement. Half an hour later, nothing. I turned to pay, heard shouts and screams, ran and saw the exact scene. The white car, the store behind, everything. A man knocked me down while trying to record with his phone. Police arrived, counted 5 injured. I returned trembling to my car and realized the mold smell got stronger when I was scared, as if I were breathing inside a cave. In the following days, the routine became vigil. I noted each ticket date, tried to arrive before at places, changed routes, alerted plaza guards about absurd suspicions. Nothing prevented the image from appearing on the windshield and then being fulfilled. Sometimes, if I drove far, the scene on the glass adjusted, showing another angle, as if tragedy were an animal following my tracks. Once I tried cleaning the windshield with water spray. The image erased for seconds and returned with more clarity. I left a market parking lot and saw in the glass reflection a truck overturned on a bridge. I turned the wheel, went up the sidewalk, and almost ran over a candy vendor. I remained motionless, feeling my heartbeat in my neck, until I realized I was crying so silently my shoulders barely moved. I told nothing at home. Francine noticed my lost gaze, but attributed it to work stress. Luke drew trucks and soldiers in old notebooks, left sheets scattered in the living room, and I took a long time observing each drawing, as if searching for clues to something even he didn't know. One night I woke on the sofa from thunder. The television showed local news. Reporters commented on a truck rollover on the bridge from the same angle I had seen. I turned it off before Francine arrived. The point of no return came on a sweltering November dawn. I woke with my face stuck to the steering wheel, shirt adhered to the seat. A loose ticket was in my lap showing the date November 10th, 2021, 3 days ahead. On the windshield, still fogged by my breathing, a blurry image formed. I waited, and the stain gained clarity. I recognized our building's facade. There were emergency lights on, smoke coming from 5th-floor windows, our floor. I saw Francine carrying Luke, coughing, looking for exit. A glow illuminated everything. Then flames licked the curtains. My throat closed. I turned off the car, ran inside the plaza looking for a phone, then remembered I had my cell. I called home. The voicemail answered. The mold smell impregnated my palate. I felt like I was chewing the seat fabric. I spent the following hours driving around the city, trying to find firefighters, explaining in panic language that something would happen. I received looks of pity and mistrust. I returned near home on the night of the 9th. The ticket shone on the dashboard like a reminder. I stayed parked in front of the building, watching it. At 3 a.m, I saw the kitchen light turn on. I felt such foolish and fleeting relief, followed by fear. I got out of the car. When I reached the gate, I heard a metallic click. The lock jammed. I knocked several times, called Francine with hoarse voice. No one answered. I ran up the external stairs toward the patio, but the secondary gate also stuck. All night I went back and forth, hitting iron against iron until exhaustion overcame me. I woke in the car with the glass clouded by my breath, in a silence that made the city seem deserted. There was a new ticket on the dashboard. The date had jumped to November 17th. I felt a strange relief, almost guilt. Maybe I had managed to postpone it. I looked up. The fifth-floor windows were intact, no smoke. I called home. Luke's sleepy voice answered, "Dad, why did you sleep in the car again?" The words wouldn't come out. I only said I would bring sweet bread for breakfast. For a whole week, I didn't see images on the windshield again. I accompanied my son to school, shopped with Francine. I said I would take vacation for some company adjustments. The mold smell, however, didn't diminish. The seat seemed alive, reminding me with each break who I really was. One Sunday morning, I decided to clean everything again. I lifted the upholstery, removed the cover, scrubbed with bleach, exposed it to direct sunlight. When I bent down to screw it back on, I found an ordered pile of parking tickets, all with dates between December 2021 and February 2022. Each sheet had a burned corner. That morning's heat didn't explain the fire marks. I touched one, it was cold, but left a dark residue on my fingers like soot. I thought about tearing out the seat, maybe burning it, but the irrational fear of releasing something worse paralyzed me. Then the image reappeared on the windshield. I was still kneeling outside and saw my reflection dissolve in the glass. In its place appeared Luke, older, maybe 9 or 10 years old, in his school uniform. He was walking on the opposite sidewalk, distracted with his phone. A truck came too fast. I tried to get up, stumbled with the tools, hit my head against the door. The image disappeared in a blink. I looked at the yard. Luke was kicking a faded ball, laughing with a neighbor. There was no truck. From then on, the visions became more frequent, sometimes 3 per day, with ticket dates running ahead of my own breathing. I don't know how many nights I slept inside the car, nor how many mornings I woke without distinguishing sleep from waking. Francine started treating me like a sick person. She left coffee in a thermos, encouraging notes on the refrigerator I barely opened. I don't blame her. I myself distrusted the reflection that no mirror showed because my image lived trapped in the windshield. I began to doubt there was an end to that game of dates. I thought about selling the car, but something prevented me. The seat, the smell, the tickets, everything was part of the same organism that breathed with me. The night of December 20th, I woke with thunder devouring the city. Rain made the parking lot roof creak. The windshield was black, like turned off. Relief and terror mixed. I didn't know what to expect. Then very slowly, the darkness gave way to a single word written with letters that seemed like condensation. Choose. Below, I saw 2 tickets stuck inside the glass. One showed December 27th, the other January 3rd. There were no scenes, just dates. I remained quiet, breathing the smell that was already part of me, trying to understand their meaning. I touched the December 27th ticket. It fell on my legs. I touched the other. It remained adhered like magnetized. In the sweltering dawn, I returned home with the 27th ticket pressed between my fingers. I spent the following week avoiding using the car, requesting app transportation, walking whenever I could. On the 26th, the visions returned, but this time they didn't need the windshield. They sprouted in my head when I blinked. I saw a house fire, a school accident, choking at dinner. Luke always at the center. It was hot, and humidity stuck to skin like molasses. Christmas night, Francine tried to hug me. I trembled so hard my teeth chattered. I told half of what was happening, omitting the other half because it would sound like delirium. She cried silently, touched my face, and said, "Let's seek help, Augustus." I nodded, knowing it was too late. The 27th arrived. I woke before the sun, sweating. I rubbed alcohol on the steering wheel, swept possible tickets, locked the car, and went to work at a temporary job I got in industrial zone warehouses. Mid-afternoon, I received a call from Luke. "Dad, can you pick me up? My friend's dad won't make it on time." Rain threatened on the horizon. I drove without thinking. The windows fogged quickly, and I saw shadows forming in the corners, but not on the windshield. When Luke got in, the mold smell seemed to expel the air. He wrinkled his nose but laughed. "Your car has always stunk." I faked a laugh. Taking the curve to exit onto the main avenue, a pickup ran the red light and crossed in front of us. I hit the brake, felt the seatbelt hold Luke, then heard the crash. Another car hit the pickup's rear, which spun and struck my bumper. My world became metal and broken glass. When the sirens faded and the tow truck took what remained of the car, I found myself standing on the sidewalk with Luke's hand in mine. He was scared but unharmed. I had a cut on my forehead and a dislocated shoulder. The paramedic checking my pulse asked about the strong mold smell on my clothes. I said I didn't know. That night in the hospital, while Luke slept in the next bed and Francine dozed in the chair, I realized the tickets had stopped. The visions had stopped. The choice had been made. I never told them about the windshield images, about the smell, about the tickets with future dates. How do you explain that for months you lived seeing tomorrow's tragedies like a morbid movie? How do you say you spent weeks deciding between dates like someone choosing lottery numbers? I returned to work. I told Francine the truth about losing my job. She cried, but not from anger, from relief that I was finally talking. We moved to a smaller apartment. Luke adapted quickly, as children do. Sometimes in other people's cars, I catch myself staring at the windshield waiting for images that never come. The mold smell disappeared from my clothes, but the memory remains, that sweet, suffocating sensation of breathing someone else's fear. I learned that some gifts are curses and some curses are gifts. I saw the future, but the price was living in permanent terror of it. Now I live in the present, and although it's uncertain, it's mine. I write this because someone needs to know that the man who warns about accidents on the highway, who calls firefighters before the fire starts, who seems to know things he shouldn't, that man pays a price. And if someday you find a car that smells like mold, with tickets from dates that haven't arrived yet, with a windshield that shows more than it should, walk away. Some prophecies aren't gifts from heaven. They're sentences that chain you to watch the world burn while you count the days until your own flames arrive. I survived because I chose love over fear, my family over certainty. But I still wonder, in the small hours before dawn, what would have happened if I had chosen the other ticket? Some questions are better left unanswered. My name is Arnold, and there's a story that's been haunting me for years now. A memory that makes me question everything I believe about life and death. I've been driving buses for over 17 years, traveling the highways of Northern California, and I've heard plenty of legends during that time. But none of them marked me like the tragedy of bus number 402. Today, at 51 years old, I still get chills telling this story, knowing that maybe I'm next in line. When I started in this profession, I was young and didn't care about superstitions. It was around that time I first heard about Charles Anderson, a driver who became a legend on these highways. Charles was known by every driver in the region, respected for his experience and dedication. He had over 20 years driving passenger buses and was considered one of the best conductors in the company. His vehicle, bus number 402, was always in perfect condition. Charles took care of that bus like it was his own child, keeping the engine running smooth and the body always gleaming. The tragedy happened during a stormy dawn, when Charles was making the route between a small town in the Sierra Nevada foothills and Sacramento. It was winter, and heavy rains were common that time of year. That particular night, the weather was especially violent, with lightning cutting through the sky and water falling like a dense curtain over the highway. Even so, Charles decided to continue the journey. He was transporting 15 passengers who trusted his skill to get them safely to their destination. The route passed through a mountain range full of dangerous curves, known for the accidents that had already happened there. According to the investigators' reports, it all started when the passengers felt an inexplicable cold inside the bus. Some witnessed strange shadows moving among the trees along the roadside. Others heard low voices mixed with the sound of the storm. Charles, always focused on driving, kept his hands firm on the steering wheel, concentrated on beating that storm. What happened next changed forever the history of that road. A massive wall of mud and rocks, loosened by the intense rain, came down the mountainside and completely blocked the lane. Charles tried to brake, but the asphalt was too slippery. The bus skidded and began sliding toward the precipice. The sound of passengers' screams mixed with the noise of metal being destroyed and the roar of nature's fury. Charles fought desperately to control the vehicle, but it was too late. The bus flipped and rolled down the slope until it stopped at the bottom of the valley. The rescue teams took hours to reach the location because of the storm. When they finally descended to the wreckage, they found a devastating scene. There were no survivors. Charles's body was found still gripping the steering wheel, his face frozen in an expression of terror and determination. The passengers were scattered throughout the wreckage, some still trapped in the twisted metal of the bus. After the accident, strange reports began. Drivers passing through the same highway told of seeing lights flashing in the mountains, even when there were no vehicles nearby. Others reported a sudden sensation of cold and the feeling of being watched. Over time, these stories multiplied, always involving the same location and the same time. My own experience happened exactly 3 years ago. I was making the night route, passing very close to the place where Charles Anderson had suffered the accident. It was a calm dawn, no rain, but the air had a strange density, as if it carried electrical energy. The dashboard clock showed 3 in the morning when something caught my attention. At a sharp curve ahead, I saw the lights of a bus flashing irregularly, as if the electrical system was failing. As I approached, I immediately recognized the characteristic silhouette of the old model used by the company years ago. It was bus number 402, but it was covered with vegetation and mud, as if it had just emerged from the bottom of the valley where it had fallen. My first reaction was to stop and check if anyone needed help, but a primitive instinct stopped me. It was as if an invisible force was screaming in my mind not to get off my bus, not to approach that apparition. Even so, when I passed alongside the phantom vehicle, I couldn't resist looking through the windows. What I saw marked me forever. Charles Anderson was in the driver's seat, hands on the steering wheel, face pale as paper. His empty eyes stared directly at me without blinking once. His mouth moved slowly, as if trying to communicate something urgent, but no sound reached my ears. There was only a deep silence, and that cold that penetrated to the bones. I accelerated without looking back, and only breathed relief when I was many miles away. I spent the rest of the dawn awake, unable to get that image out of my head. The next day, I looked for other veteran drivers and told them my experience. To my surprise, I discovered I wasn't the only one. Several colleagues had already gone through the same situation, always in the same place, always at the same time. The theories about what happens on that highway are many. Some believe that Charles Anderson's soul got trapped in his bus, condemned to eternally repeat that last fatal journey. Others say that the spirits of the passengers also remain there, lost among the wreckage of twisted metal. There are those who claim that Charles still tries to warn other drivers about the dangers of that curve, in a desperate attempt to prevent the tragedy from repeating itself. The truth is that no one can rationally explain the phenomena surrounding bus number 402. It continues appearing in those mountains, a dark reminder that some tragedies leave permanent marks on the world. Every time I pass through there during the early morning hours, I feel the weight of that presence, as if Charles Anderson is still fulfilling his last work shift. Today, after 17 years in this profession, I've started to notice disturbing similarities between my situation and Charles Anderson's. I'm the same age he was when he died. I make the same route he made, and I drive the same type of bus. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night with the feeling that my destiny is already traced, that soon I'll be the one appearing in those mountains, trying to warn the next driver about the dangers that await him. Maybe this is the true curse of Bus 402, not just haunting that highway, but calling others to join Charles Anderson's eternal vigil. If one day you pass through this road and see lights flashing in the mountains, remember my advice. Don't stop, don't look back, and pray that it's not your turn to join the ghosts of the early morning hours. My name is Roberto, and I've been working as a microbus driver for over 10 years. What I'm going to tell you here really happened to me and changed my life forever. This isn't a made-up story to scare anyone. It's a serious warning for those who travel the highways of Mexico, especially through La Rumorosa. Any driver who works with passengers has been through a lot: bad roads, stormy weather, flat tires, engine problems. But what happened to me that December night was different from everything else? It was a cold Friday night. My bus was packed with people wanting to get home for the weekend before Christmas festivities. I had left early in the morning and had already been driving for about 12 hours when night fell. The La Rumorosa highway is very dangerous, full of sharp curves and descents that are frightening. Every driver knows you can't mess around on that stretch. It must have been around 11:30 at night when I felt the steering wheel acting strange, as if the bus was skidding. I immediately reduced speed and looked at all the dashboard gauges. Everything was normal, but I knew something was wrong. Soon after, the engine started making a weird noise and the bus began shaking a lot. I couldn't continue like that. I stopped at a small rest area beside the road. It was a very dark and empty place, just a faded sign and nothing else. I told the passengers to stay calm, that I was going to take a look at the engine and we'd be on our way soon. I lifted the hood and started working on it, but I couldn't find what was wrong. Time passed and the night got colder and colder. Most people tried to sleep. Some watched through the windows, worried. When I tried to start the engine again, I saw something strange on the side. In the darkness, there was a person coming slowly in our direction. I thought it was just my imagination because I was very tired, but soon I saw it was an old woman. She was walking very slowly, somewhat hunched over, with a black cloth covering almost her entire face. I found it very strange. What old woman was that, alone in the middle of nowhere at that hour of the night? I quickly closed the hood and went inside the bus, locking the door. People started whispering. Some saw the woman too. She came close to the door and started knocking gently. Her knocks had the same rhythm, but there was something about them that gave me chills all over. I got closer and looked at her through the door's window. Her eyes were very sunken, and her skin was very white, almost transparent in the little moonlight. She kept looking at me without blinking once, and her mouth moved as if she was talking, but I couldn't hear anything. Something inside me said not to open that door under any circumstances. The old woman kept knocking, now harder. Her eyes, which before seemed dim, began to shine in a way that wasn't normal. I felt that chill in my stomach that comes when you know there's danger. "What do you want, ma'am?" I shouted through the window. She didn't answer anything, just kept knocking harder and harder. The people inside the bus started screaming with fear and asking me to let her in, but I knew I couldn't do that. Suddenly, the old woman started laughing. It was a horrible laugh that seemed to come from an animal, not a person. Her face changed completely. It became all twisted, full of malice. She hit the door with such force that I thought it would break. That's when, without thinking clearly, I tried to start the engine one more time. To my surprise, it started immediately, making a loud noise. I floored the accelerator, and we got out of there fast. I looked in the rear-view mirror and saw the old woman staying behind, her hunched figure disappearing into the darkness. The people were in total shock. Some were crying, others praying quietly. I didn't say anything, just kept driving, wanting to get far away from that cursed place. We arrived in Tijuana without any more problems, but the image of that old woman and her laugh stuck in my head. That night, I didn't sleep a wink, thinking about what I had seen, trying to find some explanation that made sense. But I knew deep in my heart that there was no explanation for that. What I faced that night was not of this world. The next day I took the bus to a shop to see if there was any damage. The mechanic, a guy who understood a lot about engines and didn't talk much, looked at me strangely. After working on the engine for a long time, he said there was nothing broken, that everything was working perfectly. This made me even more nervous. I decided to research that La Rumorosa region on the internet. I discovered there were many haunted stories in that place. People who saw strange things, accidents that no one could explain, and especially many reports of an old woman who asked drivers for help, only to show later that she was something from the devil. What happened to me that night was real. I'm sure that if I had opened the bus door, I wouldn't be alive today to tell this story. I was saved by a hair from something evil that wanted to take my soul away. Since that day, every time I pass through La Rumorosa, my heart feels tight and I pray the whole time. I'm telling this here not to scare you, it's to warn you. If one day you're traveling on this road and see an old woman asking for help in the middle of the night, don't stop the car. Don't open the door. Keep going without looking back. It might seem cruel not to help, but your life might depend on it, and maybe your soul too. My name is Raul. I've been working with passenger vans for 20 years, taking people from one side of Mexico to the other. In all this time, I've seen many ugly things on the road: crashed cars, animals crossing, heavy rain, all kinds of people. But none of that comes close to what I went through on a night trip about 3 years ago. I'm going to tell this story here because it really happened, even knowing that many people will think it's a lie or something from my head. But I swear by my mother that every word is true. It was a Friday in November. I was leaving at 11 at night from a small bus station in a town that almost nobody knows the name of. I prefer not to say the name of this place. I had to arrive in the capital when the sun came up. I was taking various people, some workers returning from their jobs, 2 students, and a tourist couple who seemed to have taken the wrong line. The night was very dark, no moon, with heavy clouds in the sky that showed it was going to rain hard. I drove for about 2 hours without problems, enjoying that peace that only exists on the road at dawn. Everyone was quiet, some sleeping, others with headphones. Everything was normal until, in a very empty part of the highway, I saw something strange. There was a person standing right in the middle of the asphalt, illuminated by the van's headlights. I slowly decreased speed until I stopped completely. It was a woman with a very old white dress that swayed even though there was no wind at all. She stood there just looking at me. I felt that chill go up my back, and a bad feeling took over me. I was thinking whether to get out to see if she needed help or just drive ahead. I decided to open the door, following that rule of always helping those in trouble. The woman entered the van very slowly, with a gentle manner. Her face was very pale, and her eyes were very strong blue that made you feel dizzy. She didn't say a word, just went to sit in the back near the window. The rest of the people barely noticed. I closed the door and went back to driving, but that strange feeling stuck in my head. In a few minutes, things started getting very weird. The weather changed immediately. A very thick fog began to cover everything, making it almost impossible to see the road. I turned on the fog lights and decreased the speed much more, trying to drive in that endless white sea. That's when I heard the first scream. It came from the back. I looked in the mirror and saw the figure in white standing in the aisle, looking at the people with a very angry face. Her face had changed completely. The eyes that before made you dizzy were now 2 black and empty holes, and her mouth was open in a horrible expression. I didn't have time to react because the lights started flashing, and the fog became even denser, covering everything in almost total darkness. Screams spread, and I could hear desperation behind me while I tried to maintain control of the van. Suddenly, an invisible force grabbed the steering wheel, forcing me to turn sharply. I tried to fight against it, but it was impossible. It felt like the entire vehicle was being pulled by a strong current from the devil. The van left the road and was dragged to a side area full of brush. I felt like we were being pulled to another place, as if that creature had opened a hole in the world. The sound of screams was deafening, and in the middle of all that desperation, the figure in white kept moving among the people like a furious ghost. I tried to step on the brake, but it didn't work. The van was being dragged until suddenly it stopped strangely, as if it had fallen from a height. When I opened my eyes, I was in a completely different place. We were in a clearing in the middle of a closed forest, under a dark sky without any stars. The van was upright, but all dented on the sides. The people were scattered around, some injured, others just half-stunned. The strangest thing is that the fog had disappeared, and the woman in white too. I tried to help everyone get out of the vehicle and put them in a safer place, but something in the air told me we weren't alone. I felt a presence, something watching us from the shadows of the forest. The people, even injured and scared, started to calm down a little while I lit some fires made on the spot with things we managed to take from the van. The silence of the forest was frightening, only broken by the sound of burning wood and the nervous whispers of the people. Some kept talking about the woman in white, asking if everything had been a dream or if everyone had seen the same thing. I couldn't answer. I myself was trying to find some explanation that made sense. The dawn passed slowly, and tiredness began to weigh on everyone. We took turns staying on guard, even without knowing exactly what we were protecting ourselves from. It was during my turn to watch that I saw her again. The creature came out from among the trees, sliding without making noise to us. This time her face was calm, but her eyes continued being those dark and empty holes. I was stuck, unable to move or scream to warn the others. She came close to me and whispered something I couldn't understand, a mixture of ancient words and sounds that seemed to come from another world. Suddenly everything became chaos again. The trees started swaying violently, as if an invisible storm was shaking everything. The people woke up scared and screamed when they saw the woman. I tried to react, but my legs didn't obey. It was like being trapped in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. The creature moved among the people, and every time she touched someone, the person fell to the ground lifeless. The screams stopped quickly, replaced by an even more frightening silence. When I finally managed to control my body, I ran to the van looking for something to defend us with. I found an iron bar among the broken pieces and ran back to the clearing. The woman was standing there in the middle, surrounded by the bodies of my people. Rage and desperation took over me, and without thinking clearly, I ran toward her with the bar raised. But before I could reach her, she raised her hand and everything stopped. I felt a horrible force that lifted me from the ground and threw me against a tree. The pain was terrible, and the bar fell from my hand. The creature approached slowly and whispered again, this time clearer, "You shouldn't have stopped." The world began to disappear around me. The trees, the ground, the sky, everything mixed in a spiral of darkness and light. The last thing I saw were those eyes, those infinite holes that seemed to suck everything. Then everything went black. I woke up in the hospital with the sound of machines and the murmur of nurses around me. They told me they had found me unconscious on the road beside the completely destroyed van. My people had all been found dead. The cause of their death wasn't properly determined, and the authorities said it was a serious accident. Nobody believed my story about the woman in white, and over time, I learned to stay quiet about it. But every time I drive at night, I can't help looking in the mirror, expecting to see those eyes that made you dizzy and that ghost figure in the darkness. Now I know there are things in this life that we can't understand, forces beyond what we can imagine that hide in the darkest places of the world. And every time I see a person on the road, I feel that chill on my back, remembering that dawn and the unexplainable horror we lived through. I live with the guilt of having lost my people, and every kilometer I travel is a reminder of what happened. The road that was once my shelter and my life is now a constant reminder of the terror that hides in the shadows. I try to continue to do my work, but I know I'll never be able to completely forget what I lived through that dawn. I tell this here because maybe it can serve as a warning to other drivers. I learned that not everything we find on the road needs our help. Sometimes kindness can be a trap. If you travel at night and see someone standing in the middle of the road asking for help, think twice before stopping. It might seem cruel, but sometimes it's better to keep going because there are things out there that aren't from our world. And once we let them into our lives, there's no turning back. My name is Marcus. Since I was little, I always liked driving and ended up becoming a bus driver. I've been working at this for 23 years and have traveled all over Mexico from north to south. In all this time, I've seen things you can't even imagine: ugly accidents, storms that knock trees down on the road, wild animals crossing in front of the bus. But there's one thing that happened to me that was different from everything else, an experience that changed my life forever. It was on a night I can't forget, when I passed through a place that should have stayed quiet forever. It was a rainy Friday in October, about 4 years ago. My normal route passed through several small towns, but that day there was construction on the main road, and I had to take a path I didn't know well. I had heard some colleagues commenting about that road, always speaking quietly with faces of people who didn't want to remember the subject. They talked about a cemetery in the middle of nowhere, but I always thought it was talk to scare new drivers. It was approximately 11 at night when I saw the old and rusted sign pointing to the cemetery entrance. The wind was too strong and the rain fell as if the world was going to end. The sign looked like a crooked bone pointing to darkness. There was no other way. I needed to go through there. The bus engine made a loud noise when I entered the narrow path full of large and twisted trees on both sides that seemed to want to grab me. The road curved between the hills, and as I drove, the fog started getting very thick. I could only see a few meters ahead. The headlights cut through that white mist, and sometimes showed strange shapes among the trees that looked like people. My passengers on the bus, about 12 people of various ages, were sleeping or looking out the window with tired faces. Nobody seemed to notice that something strange was happening. Only I felt that chill in my stomach. That's when I saw him. A guy appeared standing right in the middle of the road, looking straight at me. I stepped hard on the brake. The bus skidded and stopped very close to the figure. I turned on the high beams and saw it was a man with old and dirty clothes. His skin was white like paper, and his eyes were empty. The figure disappeared into the fog quickly, as if it had never been there. I felt that shiver go up my back, but I couldn't stop to think. I had to continue. I put the bus in gear again, driving very slowly. The road seemed to have no end, and the silence inside the vehicle became heavy that you could cut it. Suddenly, I felt a cold that froze my bones. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw something that almost killed me with fright. All the windows became foggy, and on the glass, handprints started appearing, as if someone on the other side was trying to talk to us. The people also started noticing. Some nervous comments took over the bus while I tried to understand what was happening. A young woman started crying quietly, holding her small child very tight. The atmosphere inside the bus became heavy, as if something invisible was taking over everything. I tried to stay calm and pay attention to the road, but the certainty that we weren't alone became stronger and stronger. The fog became so dense that I had to drive almost stopping. Each meter seemed to last a lifetime. That's when I saw the tombstones on both sides of the path. They appeared out of nowhere like guardians of a forgotten world. I knew we were arriving at the cemetery, and my heart started beating uncontrollably. The stones were old, covered with green moss. Some were fallen on the ground, others all crooked. It seemed like even time had forgotten that place. The bus started having problems. The headlights flickered and the engine made a weird noise. I decided to stop to see what was happening. When I got out, the cold air hit me like a punch. The rain had stopped, but the fog was so thick I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. I opened the hood and looked at the engine, but I didn't find anything wrong. When I was going to close it, I heard a whisper, a very low sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. "Marcus, Marcus." The whisper spoke my name, spreading in the air like a cold breath. I looked around looking for where it came from, but there was nobody. I ran back to the bus trembling with fear and saw that everyone was awake, looking at me with wide eyes. Something was very wrong. Suddenly, the bus doors opened by themselves, as if an invisible force had pushed them. A cold wind entered, making everyone scream with terror. I tried to close the doors, but they wouldn't move. That's when I saw her. A woman all in white with a cloth covering her face appeared at the bus entrance. Her presence was from another world, as if she didn't belong here. "What do you want, ma'am?" I managed to say with a trembling voice. She didn't answer, gliding through the corridor, passing by each seat, looking at each passenger with eyes I couldn't see. I felt a tightness in my chest, as if just having her there already sucked all the air. The people started praying quietly and hugging each other, looking for comfort in the middle of that nightmare. The woman stopped right in front of me, slowly lifted the cloth that covered her face, showing a pale and dead face with empty eyes that seemed to look directly into my soul. She extended her hand toward me, and at that moment, the entire bus filled with screams and moans. I saw ghost figures appear and disappear through the windows, shadows that moved wanting to do harm. With desperate effort, I managed to start the engine again. The doors closed violently and the bus shot out, almost jumping on the road. The woman disappeared, but her presence continued in the air. I accelerated as much as I could, wanting to get out of that cursed place soon. The fog started clearing gradually, and the tombstones became rarer. I realized we were leaving the cemetery territory. Finally, I saw the lights of a small town far away. The feeling of relief was enormous, but I knew that what had happened to us wasn't something to forget easily. We arrived in town, and everyone got off the bus running, some crying, others in shock. Nobody talked about what had happened. I stayed alone in the bus, trembling and trying to understand what had occurred. I knew I couldn't continue the trip that night, so I looked for a place to sleep until dawn. I found a small guest house and rented a room. I barely slept, disturbed by the images of that night. The next day I returned to the road, determined to never take that path again. But the experience had changed me. Every time I passed near cemeteries, I felt chills, and rainy nights always brought memories of that woman and the whispers calling my name. Since then, I researched about that cemetery. I discovered that about 50 years ago, a terrible tragedy happened there. A bus full of people had an accident in the fog, and everyone inside died instantly. They say their souls never found peace, and that on rainy nights, they look for the living to take with them. I don't know if what I lived was an apparition of those souls or a nightmare from my tired head, but I know one thing: I'll never go back to pass through that place again. Because there are things in this world that we can't understand, and sometimes it's better not to look for explanations. The road can be a lonely place, but that night I learned that there's loneliness much worse, inhabited by those who no longer belong to this world, but still look for a way to return. Now every time I meet a fellow driver at a gas station, I tell this story as a warning. Some believe, others laugh thinking it's a joke. But those who have already felt strange presences on the road know that my words are true. Because when the night becomes very dark, when the wind whispers among the trees and fog covers the asphalt, the lost souls continue out there, always attentive, always waiting for a chance to not be alone forever. My name is Rodrigo. For 15 years I've been driving buses throughout Mexico, and I always thought I had seen everything on the road. Accidents, flat tires in the rain, drunk people causing trouble, animals crossing the road at dawn. I thought nothing else could surprise me, until something happened that completely changed my vision of what exists in this world. It was on a night that doesn't leave my head, an experience that made me question everything I believed about life and death. I was on a Friday in September, about 2 years ago. I had to make the line from Guadalajara to Puebla, a trip I usually make at least twice a month. Dark clouds had been gathering since the afternoon, showing that heavy rain was coming that seemed to want to swallow the entire world. The wind screamed like a wounded animal, and water hit the bus windows with fury, making it almost impossible to see more than a few meters ahead. I was taking only 10 people on that trip, most sleeping or trying not to pay attention to the heavy rain surrounding us. The water ran down the glass, making a constant noise that on any other day would even be relaxing. But that night, there was something different in the air, something that made my stomach queasy. Everything started when I picked up the last passenger at a stop in a very small town on the way. I left her there under the awning, alone and soaked, with a face of sadness that was pitiful. It seemed like she had been waiting for a very long time. She didn't have luggage, just a small bag that she held tight to her chest. I opened the door and she got on quickly, making a sign of gratitude with her head. She went to sit in the back, far from the others. Through the rearview mirror, I could see her very pale face and dark, empty eyes, as if she carried a very great pain inside. The rain got worse as we continued the trip. Thunder made noise like exploding bombs, and lightning lit up the sky with a strange light. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to keep the vehicle on the slippery road. That's when that strange sensation began. It was like a cold that entered the bones, different from the cold air of the rain. It was a cold from inside, a feeling that something wasn't right. The others also seemed to have noticed. They were restless, talking quietly among themselves and looking around with distrust. The woman in the back didn't move, staying in her place, looking fixedly out the window. The light from the lightning showed her face from time to time, revealing an expression of very deep sadness. I kept driving, trying to get that sensation out of my head, but then something happened that I'll never forget. In the middle of the heavy rain, I saw a person standing right in the middle of the road. I stepped hard on the brake, making the vehicle skid and make a horrible noise. Everyone screamed, grabbing onto the seats. The person disappeared as quickly as they had appeared, and when I managed to control the vehicle again, there was no trace of them. I was sweating cold, and my heart was beating uncontrollably. Nobody else seemed to have seen the person, but everyone was tense, as if they felt something terrible was going to happen. I continued the trip with my heart in my hand. The road seemed to have no end, and the rain showed no sign of stopping. The silence inside the vehicle was almost total, only broken by the sound of water and wind. Suddenly, the inside lights started flickering. It was as if something was sucking the energy. I looked at the passengers in the rearview mirror and saw pale faces reflecting the same fear I was feeling. It was at that moment that the woman in the back stood up very slowly. All eyes turned to her. She walked to the front with slow steps in the same rhythm. There was something in the way she moved, something that wasn't normal and was very frightening. She stopped beside me, and for a moment her eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. I felt a chill go up my spine. Her eyes were dark holes full of pain that couldn't be explained. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Then she simply disappeared. Desperation took over me. I turned my head expecting to see her beside me, but there was nobody. The passengers were in total shock. Nervous whispers filled the air. Something terrible was happening, and I had no idea how to stop it. I accelerated desperately to reach the next city, any place where I could stop and ask for help. But the road seemed to have no end, and the rain continued without giving up. The minutes turned into hours, and fear turned into total desperation. Then the engine started failing. It made a strange noise before turning off completely, leaving us stopped in the middle of nowhere. The darkness and silence were total, only with the very loud sound of rain. The passengers were almost in panic. Some were crying, others praying quietly. I tried to start the engine again, but it was no use. The battery was dead, and the vehicle showed no signs of life. Desperate, I turned to the passengers, trying to stay calm. That's when I saw her again. She was there in the middle of the aisle, looking at me with those dark and empty eyes. The air became colder, and a sensation of death took over the environment. She came toward me, and this time when she opened her mouth, I heard a very low whisper. "You shouldn't be here." Her words sounded in my mind, filling me with a terror that couldn't be explained. I knew at that moment that she wasn't a normal passenger. She was a ghost, a lost soul trapped between this world and the other. With each step she took, I felt her pain, her sadness, her desperation. It was as if her presence sucked all life around. The others looked at her, frozen with fear. When she reached my side, everything went black. I don't remember how long I was unconscious. When I came back to myself, the rain had stopped and dawn was beginning to appear on the horizon. The passengers were still in their seats, half dazed. The woman had disappeared. I tried to start the engine again, and this time it worked without problem. With trembling hands, I continued the trip to the next city. When I arrived, I left the passengers and went looking for someone to tell what had happened. That's when an old mechanic from the city told me that this story had happened before. He said that about 10 years ago, a woman died in a car accident on that same road during a rain just like that one. Since then, her ghost appears to drivers who pass through there on stormy nights, looking for a way to find peace. The experience marked me forever. I continue driving, but every time a heavy rain approaches, I remember that night. I remember the woman, her pain, her desperation, and I wonder if one day she'll manage to find the peace she's looking for so much. Today I tell this story to other drivers as a warning. Some believe, others laugh thinking it's an invention. But those who have already gone through something similar know I'm telling the truth. Because on the road, especially at night and with heavy rain, you never know what type of passenger might enter your vehicle. And sometimes that person might not be from this world. Today, at 65 years old, I live alone in a small house on the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona. It's been 3 years since I abruptly retired, leaving behind 3 decades as a bus driver. People think it was because of my age, but I know the truth. There's one night that changed everything, an experience that haunts me to this day. I need to tell this story before it's too late. My name is Eduardo, and this is the night that destroyed my life. Back then, I had been driving the highways of the American Southwest for over 30 years. I never believed in ghosts or things from the other world. I was always a practical man. But what happened on a cold winter night 3 years ago transformed everything I thought about reality. It was a very dark night, covered by a fog so thick it seemed like a gray sheet over the world. My bus, an old model I knew like the palm of my hand, was moving slowly along a mountain road in New Mexico. A landslide had closed the main highway, forcing me to use that path as the only option. Inside the bus, 12 passengers rested, most sleeping, trusting me to get them safely to their destination. I felt the weight of that responsibility on my shoulders. The road was narrow and full of dangerous curves, with a precipice on one side and a stone wall on the other. I could barely see anything, and the bus headlights barely cut through the fog, creating strange shadows that danced in the darkness. Concentrated on the steering wheel, I barely noticed when it started to rain. The drops hit the windshield in a constant rhythm that left me even more isolated. It was then that I saw a figure in the distance, a shadow that moved slowly along the roadside. I reduced speed and approached carefully. As I got closer, the figure became clearer. It was a tall, thin man wearing dark clothes and a cape that swayed in the wind. He walked very slowly, in a strange, almost abnormal way. When I got close to him, the man stopped and raised his head. I could see his face in the weak light of the headlights. He had black, deep eyes and a smile that gave me chills. Without thinking twice, I accelerated, wanting to leave that vision behind as quickly as possible. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw he was still there, in the same place, looking at me fixedly. That smile hadn't disappeared. I tried to focus on driving, but the presence of that stranger wouldn't leave my head. The fog became even denser, as if it wanted to swallow the entire bus. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, my fingers white from squeezing so hard. Suddenly, a strong bang echoed on the bus roof. Then another and another. The passengers woke up scared, whispering among themselves. I reduced speed and looked in the mirror, but I didn't see anything different. The noise stopped as quickly as it had started, leaving only the sound of rain and the engine. I continued driving, trying to stay calm, but I knew something was wrong. I felt pressure in my chest, as if something terrible was going to happen. That's when the bus radio, which had been silent all night, started making static. I fiddled with the dial looking for some station, but I only got more interference and pieces of distorted voices. Suddenly, in the middle of the noise, I heard laughter, a low, rough laugh that seemed to come from everywhere at once. My skin crawled, and cold sweat ran down my forehead. It wasn't human laughter. There was something very cruel in it. I turned off the radio, but the laughter continued in my head, as if it had invaded my thoughts. The passengers also seemed restless, looking at each other with fear. Nobody said anything, but we all felt the same heavy atmosphere. Suddenly, the bus lights failed and went out completely, throwing us into total darkness. Outside, the rain continued with force, and the fog seemed even thicker. A murmur of panic began among the passengers. I tried to turn on the emergency lights, but nothing worked. We were trapped in the dark, unable to continue. That's when I saw him. The man from the road was right in front of the bus, almost invisible through the fogged windshield. But something had changed in him. His eyes glowed with a strange light, and his smile had widened until it deformed his face into a horrible grimace. I felt the urge to get out of the bus and face him, but a voice inside my head told me to stay still, not to open the door. I swallowed hard and tried to think of a way out. Suddenly, the bus door opened by itself with a chilling noise. The man began to climb the steps, moving slowly and calmly. The passengers moved away, some praying quietly, others screaming with terror. I couldn't move, as if I were glued to the spot. When the man entered completely, the temperature inside the bus dropped a lot. His presence was like a shadow of pure evil, a darkness you could feel that seemed to suck all light and hope. He stood in the middle aisle, staring at me. At that moment, I understood he wasn't an ordinary man. He was something much older and darker. The being turned to the passengers, and with a slow movement, raised one of his hands. One by one, they began to fall to the floor, unconscious or dead. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't obey. Fear left me completely paralyzed. When all the passengers were on the floor, he turned his attention back to me. His eyes burned with a light from hell. I felt his presence inside my mind, messing with my worst memories and deepest fears. "Eduardo," he spoke with a voice that echoed in my soul. "Do you believe in destiny?" I couldn't answer. I could only look at him, trapped in that hypnotizing gaze. "You're the only one who can decide the fate of these poor creatures," he continued. "You have to choose your life or their lives." The pressure in my mind increased, and the pain became unbearable. I felt like my head was going to explode. He extended a hand toward me, and in the center of his palm appeared a small blue flame. The flame grew, becoming a fireball that seemed to have the power of 1,000 hells. "Choose Eduardo," he said with an evil smile. "Choose now." In a final effort, I raised my eyes and screamed with all the strength I had, "Never." The flame disappeared, and he took a step back. Hellish laughter sounded again, filling the bus with its terrible sound. "You've made your choice," he said, and with a gesture of his hand, darkness fell over me. When I woke up, I was alone in the bus. The rain had stopped and the fog had dispersed. The passengers were still there, but they no longer had life. Their bodies were cold and stiff. I knew they were dead. With a broken heart and confused mind, I managed to start the engine and drove the bus back to the city. I didn't know how to explain what had happened. Who would believe that the devil himself had appeared on a dark night to take the souls of my passengers? The authorities never found an explanation that made sense. The bodies were buried, and the case was lost among stories and legends of the region. But I knew the truth. I had seen the face of evil and felt its power. Since that night, I never drove a bus again. I couldn't carry the weight of guilt or forget those diabolic eyes. I retired to a solitary life, always tormented by the images of that night. Now, 3 years later, I feel my time is running out. Lately, I've been noticing strange things, shadows moving in the corners of the house, whispers in the wind, and always that laughter echoing quietly during the early morning hours. The temperature in my room has been dropping without explanation, and sometimes I wake up with the feeling that someone is watching me. I know he hasn't forgotten me. I know that soon he'll come to collect the price of the choice I made that night. There's no way to escape destiny when you make a deal with evil. This is my confession, written in the last hours of a life that was never the same again. If someone finds these words, know that the devil is real and I am living proof of his existence. The contract is almost due, and I can feel his presence getting closer each day. Soon, very soon, I'll have to pay for what I did that night in the mountains of New Mexico. The darkness is calling, and I can no longer run from what's coming for me. As a taxi driver in downtown Phoenix, I've picked up every type of person you can imagine. But this well-dressed, middle-aged man I encountered one early morning at the Greyhound station was different from all the others. What should have been just another night shift ride turned into a conversation that planted a terrible doubt in my mind, a suspicion that haunts me months later. I work mainly Saturday nights in the places where people go to drown their sorrows: bars, nightclubs, casinos, and other establishments of that nature. The fares are better during nighttime hours, so it pays off. That particular dawn, I had just dropped off 2 intoxicated young women at their residences. One of them, a redhead, claimed she didn't have money for a tip and decided to show me her breasts as compensation. While not entirely unpleasant, I would have preferred cash payment. It was approximately 3:30 in the morning when I passed the Greyhound station downtown, right in the center of my work area. Practically all the clubs, casinos, and nightlife venues are nearby. As I drove past after dropping off my passengers, I spotted a tall, elegantly dressed man who waved and signaled for me to stop. In my experience as a cabbie, a man in a fine suit at dawn usually means a good tip, so I didn't hesitate. When he got into the vehicle and closed the door, he removed an elegant hat he was wearing. The guy looked like a classic movie star and was visibly out of place. Up close, I noticed his style was antiquated, as if he'd stepped directly out of the 1950s. From a distance, he appeared older, but up close I could tell he was probably between 30 and 35. As I routinely do, I asked for his destination. His response surprised me. "I'm not sure. I'm in town on business and would like someone to show me the important sights." The request seemed strange for that hour, but being professional, I replied, "As long as you pay the fare, sir, I can take you wherever you want." For the next 2 hours, I showed him the main attractions of Phoenix: Arizona State University campus, government buildings, parks, renowned restaurants, hotels, and various nightlife entertainment venues. At some point during the route, he mentioned again that he was in town on business. I asked about his profession, if it wasn't too personal. His response was so unusual it made me laugh. "I'm what people would call a professional assassin." Since I was enjoying the conversation, I decided to play along. "Very well, sir, I'll enter your game. How does this type of activity work? Do you have a business number? Do you appear in the phone book?" He explained that a client contacted him through another client. Obviously, his number wasn't public, but he could be found through intermediaries. I asked about the business details. "It's simple," he said. "She provides names, photographs, and any necessary information to execute the service properly. If I accept the job, we discuss prices, reach an agreement, and I execute everything while maintaining complete anonymity." I questioned how he guaranteed payment after harming someone. My choice of words amused him greatly. "It wouldn't be prudent to reveal those details, as we professionals need to keep some secrets." I persisted. "How does the client confirm the service was completed?" Though it was a foolish question, he responded with sarcasm. "We live in an era of 24-hour news on multiple channels and social networks. If your father died suddenly, wouldn't someone notify your mother first? After I receive payment, my relationship with the client ends." I asked about possible complications like arrests or police involvement. He considered carefully before responding. "I've established contingencies for protection. If I've done my job correctly, the client possesses no information about me to hand over to authorities. If I make serious mistakes, I have multiple escape routes. I would never allow police to capture me, though none of us live forever." I confess that at several moments I had to remind myself this was all an elaborate act, but his creativity and planning impressed me deeply. After hours in this dynamic, I asked how he'd entered this profession. "I enlisted in the Army right after high school. My performance caught the attention of superiors who introduced me to certain government individuals. I worked for them for 10 years before deciding to go independent. I praised his narrative skill and suggested he consider becoming a professional writer. I'm genuinely impressed. This has been the most interesting conversation I've ever had working as a taxi driver. Usually, I deal with drunks and arrogant businessmen, so this interaction was truly pleasurable. Thank you, young man. Thank you for everything you showed me this dawn, he replied. I realized he was signaling the end of the ride. The sun was beginning to rise, and I felt tired, but I seized the opportunity to ask one final question I should have asked earlier. When you said you were in town on business, does that mean you came to kill someone? A malicious smile appeared as he formulated his response. In fact, that was the intention. However, I received a last-minute cancellation and can keep half the advance payment, so I don't mind. Business sometimes works that way. It's a woman's prerogative to change her mind. I hope she and her husband resolve their problems. I ended the service just as the first rays of sunlight appeared. He indicated where he'd be staying. There were hotels near the parking area. When we arrived, he handed me $100 and told me to keep the change. Before I could protest, It was more than double what was owed. I was too exhausted to argue. "Keep the difference, kid. You deserved it. It was a very pleasant night." "Thank you, sir. For me too, especially for the fantastic story you shared." He got out of the vehicle after this exchange, but before walking away, he said something that chilled me completely. "Thank you for showing me the city, Carlos. Take good care of Laura and avoid trouble." As he spoke, he gave me a few pats on the shoulder. I drove home expecting Laura to have prepared breakfast, but then his final words hit me like a blow. How did that man know my name and my wife's name? My driver's license wasn't visible at any moment. I mentally reviewed the entire night's conversation and never mentioned information that would compromise our act. I didn't ask his name, nor had reason to reveal mine, much less my wife's. How did he discover I was married? I haven't worn a wedding ring in years, lost it down a drain, and never replaced it. He also couldn't have deduced that Laura and I had reconciled just 1 week earlier after months of separation and 2 years considering divorce. As I entered the garage, a terrifying idea occurred to me. Was it possible that man wasn't making up stories and everything was true? If he was serious, then knowing our names could only mean one specific thing. Even if it were true, I wasn't prepared to accept that possibility. That morning, while Laura and I had breakfast, I couldn't help observing her with constant suspicion. The idea that my wife might have wanted my death, even changing her mind afterward, terrified me. How could I accept such a possibility? Would she be capable of something like that? I considered questioning her directly, but she would never admit it. And if she confessed, I really wasn't prepared for that revelation. I remained silent while she lovingly served me dessert. For an instant, I hesitated to try it, but she offered it with such sweetness that I couldn't refuse. Since then, I've been trying to forget this episode to preserve my mental sanity, but the suspicion that man awakened continues alive in my thoughts. Eventually, perhaps I'll find the courage to confront Laura about it. But for now, I prefer to keep these reflections to myself. Some secrets perhaps should remain buried, at least until we have absolute certainty that we want to know the truth behind them. Since I was young, I never liked depending on others to get from one place to another. So when I got my car, I decided to work making deliveries instead of being stuck behind a store counter, because that way I could better enjoy the freedom I wanted so much. On one of those normal Wednesday nights, I came back from school around 5 in the afternoon and had to start work at 6. The beginning was pretty tough, but after 8 at night things calmed down considerably. The next delivery wasn't scheduled until 9, when I needed to take 2 medium pizzas to a house in a nearby neighborhood in suburban Denver. I grabbed the pizzas and left to make the delivery. Since it was midweek, the street was pretty quiet, only a vehicle here and there from time to time. But when I was getting close to the neighborhood, a car pulled out of a side street and stuck right behind me. At that hour, the street was practically empty, so the driver could have passed me without any problem, but he preferred to stay there following me. At first, I didn't pay attention because I was focused on the delivery, but for the next 5 minutes, the vehicle stayed glued behind me, and that started to bother me. When I turned to enter the neighborhood, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the headlights continuing to follow every curve I made. I thought it was too much of a coincidence for the only other car on the street to be going to exactly the same place as me. This made me even more uneasy, but I continued down that tree-lined street with houses well spaced apart, some close to the road, others with long driveways. Finally, my headlights hit a mailbox with the same number as the order. When I arrived, I turned into the driveway and checked my mirrors once more. To my relief, the car that had been following me drove straight past and continued ahead. I even laughed at myself there, feeling kind of silly for getting nervous over nothing. I drove to the end of the driveway, which must have been about 200 feet long, turned off the engine, and got out with the pizzas to make the delivery. Smiling, I knocked on the door several times, but no one appeared. The porch light was on, but the house was completely dark inside. I knocked again, and after a few moments, a light finally came on in one of the windows. Soon after, a woman came to open the door. She must have been about 30, was wearing a nightgown, and looked like she'd just woken up. "Hi, I brought a pizza order for this address," I said, showing her the paper with the address. But she made a strange face and said she hadn't ordered any pizza and was trying to sleep. Her manner was somewhat rude, and even knowing there might have been some confusion, I couldn't help feeling something weird was happening. I checked the address on the paper again, seeing it matched the house exactly, which left me completely puzzled. But if she was saying it wasn't hers, I wasn't going to insist. I apologized and started walking back to the car, looking at the order in my hand. But when I raised my head, I felt like someone had thrown a rock into my stomach. The vehicle that had followed me was parked right behind mine with its headlights off. I could see exhaust smoke showing the engine was still running. A horrible feeling and terrible fear took hold of me. Was the woman involved with whoever was in the car? This situation was way too strange, like it was all set up. I continued walking to my car, now with shaky legs, hoping whoever was driving would leave or at least say something. When I got there, I got in the vehicle and put the pizzas on the passenger seat. I started the engine and prepared to leave, but the other car stayed there, blocking the exit. The driveway wasn't wide, so I tried to get closer to the house to turn around, but the guy stayed right in the middle, not letting me pass at all. We sat there for several seconds in spine-chilling silence. My heart was racing in my chest, and I felt desperation rising. Suddenly, the doors flew open, and 4 men jumped out, all wearing hoodies that covered almost their entire faces, and one of them had his hand stuck in his pocket like he had something in there. My heart almost stopped beating. The 4 started running in my direction, and panic immediately exploded in my body, making me act without thinking. Completely desperate, I floored the accelerator trying to get around them and escape, but there wasn't enough space, and the wheels slipped off the driveway, hitting a tree on the side. The impact was strong and loud, but the airbag didn't even deploy, and I didn't think I was stuck, besides not having time to find out. I jumped out of the vehicle without thinking twice and ran toward the street. Behind me, I heard one of them yelling for me to stop while chasing me, but I was running on pure adrenaline, running for my life. The head start I got in the race prevented them from getting close, and thank God they stopped chasing me after a while. I felt relief when I saw them falling behind, but I wasn't going to relax. Instead of following the road and risking being caught by car, I decided to enter the woods where I hid among the trees and called the police. When the officers arrived, there was no one left at the location. The men and their car had vanished into thin air, but they took mine with them. My beloved vehicle was never found, and to this day, I don't really know what happened that night. One thing became clear. They made up a fake address to call me with the pizza order, certainly wanting to catch me for something bad. I keep thinking that if one of them came running after me like that, their intentions were the worst possible. It was great luck that I managed to escape unharmed from that trap. From that day on, I never again accepted deliveries when it was dark. Even after all this time, that fear still returns every time I remember what I went through that terrible night. That Tuesday was one of those days you want to forget forever. After a grueling day at the office in downtown Seattle, I left very late and had the misfortune of finding the main highway blocked due to an accident. I had no choice but to take that old road that cuts through the forest, a path I always avoided, especially at night. I was exhausted and desperately wanted to get home to rest, but since leaving the parking garage, a bad feeling wouldn't leave me alone. After several miles, my old sedan that had always been reliable started having problems. First, there were strange noises, then it gradually lost power. Every time I accelerated to try to keep it running, it made a sound like an explosion and almost died. "Hold on there, buddy," I muttered, as if the vehicle would understand me. But it choked, vibrated, and stopped working right in the middle of that deserted road. "This can't be happening to me," I said almost in despair, while resting my forehead on the steering wheel repeatedly. I got out and lifted the hood, but as always, I didn't understand anything I was looking at. The engine was overheated, and smoke was coming out of it, along with a terrible smell of fuel, mixed with burnt oil. It was obvious I couldn't solve this alone, so I grabbed my cell phone to call for help and discovered there was no signal. At that moment, I let out some choice words and felt I was about to panic. I breathed deeply and tried to think clearly. The nearest town was about 5 miles away. Even though it was risky to walk alone on that dark road, I had no alternative. Before leaving, I remembered the advice I always received at work: never go out unprotected. I grabbed my multi-tool knife that normally only served to open bottles and put it in my pocket. I started walking along the road's edge, listening to the wind rustling the treetops, and any sound startled me. The road was completely abandoned at that hour. Only the faint light of stars illuminated the path. I had walked a little over half a mile when I heard the rumble of an engine. I turned around, hoping to find someone willing to give me a ride to town, but I soon realized something was wrong. It was a white van with a suspicious appearance, no visible license plates, and its headlights were off. It was moving very slowly, as if the driver was looking for something specific. At that instant, several disturbing thoughts went through my head. That vehicle had a very strange appearance, and something told me to be careful. So I hid among the trees to avoid being seen. It passed without stopping, which gave me some peace of mind, but soon after it parked further ahead. I saw the doors open and 2 men got out. I couldn't make out their faces, but they wore dark clothes, and there was something threatening about their movements. One of them was carrying some object in his hands, maybe a tool or weapon. I couldn't identify it properly, but it wasn't a good sign. I wanted to get out of there quickly, but any sudden movement would give me away. I remained motionless behind the trees when one of them directed his gaze exactly where I was. My survival instinct kicked in. I took off like crazy among the trees and plunged into the forest. I immediately heard their voices and the sound of footsteps chasing me. I ran as fast as I could, feeling my lungs burn, but at that moment I tripped on a root and fell violently to the ground. As I got up, I spotted a structure in the middle of the vegetation. A 2-story wooden house that seemed well maintained and had a light on inside, indicating someone probably lived there. Thank you, God, I thought with relief. I got there and started desperately knocking on the door. Please help me open the door, but there was no response. After several unsuccessful attempts, I looked through the window and found the interior was empty. But the voices of my pursuers were getting closer, and I had no choice but to enter through a side window. As soon as I managed to get through, I pushed a heavy piece of furniture against the door to block it and positioned myself crouched by the window. There were the 2 men standing at the edge of the woods, as if they knew exactly where I was. One of them raised his arm and pointed directly at the house. It was then that I heard something that completely terrified me, a creaking sound coming from the upper floor. Heavy footsteps were moving up there and began slowly heading toward the staircase. Help, friend, I'm not a criminal. I'm running from some bandits, I shouted, thinking it was the homeowner, but I got no response. What I heard was the laughter of the men outside, and I froze when the footsteps began descending the stairs. The steps were measured and calm, as if the person wasn't scared or surprised by my presence. Now, if someone invaded my house during the early hours, I would come out nervous, grab something to defend myself, and shout asking who was there. My heart was beating so fast it felt like it would explode in my chest. The men outside remained motionless, just waiting, as if they were certain I had no way to escape. At that moment, the noise on the stairs intensified, one heavy step, then another. That's when my preservation instinct activated again. I knew I had to get out of that place immediately. So I grabbed the knife with trembling hands, even knowing it would be useless against 3 people who had the numerical advantage. The back door was my only hope. I had to try to escape through there. It was the only possible exit, but I needed to be silent. I took off my shoes and moved carefully to the kitchen, stepping with extreme care to make no sound. The floorboards groaned softly under my weight. When I reached the back door, I pushed it with all my strength, but it didn't give. It was locked, or worse yet, had been closed from the outside. At that instant, I heard a sharp crack. The sound came from the hallway. Someone had reached the ground floor. That's when panic completely took hold of me. I forgot all caution and acted on impulse. I grabbed an old chair and threw it with all my strength against the kitchen window. The glass shattered instantly, producing a crash that could certainly be heard for miles. But I no longer cared about that. Suddenly, everything turned to total chaos. The men outside took off running toward the house, and the footsteps in the hallway turned into a frenzied race in my direction, while I threw myself through the shattered window, feeling glass fragments cutting my arms and tearing my clothes. But I didn't look back for even a second. I ran like I had never run in my life, diving back into the forest, hearing my pursuers shouting for me to stop and making threats. Terror gave me superhuman energy, and soon I noticed their voices were getting more distant. Miraculously, after covering several hundred yards, I spotted headlight beams on the road. An old pickup truck was traveling there, and I screamed desperately, waving my arms until the driver, a farmer of about 70, braked sharply a few feet from me. "What the hell are you doing out here, son?" he asked while I climbed into the truck bed as if my life depended on it. "Drive, for God's sake, drive," I begged, looking back in absolute panic. The man understood the urgency in my voice and accelerated immediately, getting me out of that nightmare. As we drove away, I managed to glimpse among the trees the silhouettes of my pursuers standing exactly where the forest ended. They didn't try to follow us. The farmer took me to the nearest gas station, and the employees looked at me strangely. I didn't blame them. I must have looked like a vagrant with my bloodied arms and clothes in tatters. From there, I called the police and the tow service to rescue my vehicle. However, when we arrived at the location where I had left it, we found no trace. Only fresh tire marks in the dirt, as if someone had dragged it from there. My car was never recovered, and I never traveled that road again. Even today, when I'm alone during the early hours, sometimes I dream that I'm trapped again in that house and wake up startled, trembling, and drenched in sweat. It's a traumatic experience I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy, but I feel grateful to have escaped with my life. Even having lost my vehicle, I got out of there only with the wounds caused by the window glass, but alive to tell this terrible story. What happened on that drive home after Christmas 2013 still haunts me to this day. We had just spent some wonderful days with my grandparents in rural Kentucky, enjoying the holidays as a family. The warm atmosphere of Christmas celebrations had left us all very happy. But during the return trip, something very sinister and inexplicable was waiting for us on the road. A mysterious presence that knew our identity even though we had no idea what we were dealing with. It was the early morning hours of December 25th. My family and I were heading south from Kentucky after a very special and cozy stay at my grandparents' house during the holiday. But in the middle of the journey back, my dad made an observation that caught both mine and my mom's attention. "Didn't you notice that Grandma was acting kind of weird?" my dad commented out of nowhere. At that moment, we had already been in the vehicle for more than 3 hours, so it was quite unusual for him to mention this so suddenly. My mom responded with just a maybe, "Why?" Her voice showed interest, and she fixed her gaze on my dad's eyes as if trying to decipher his thoughts. "It wasn't just," he began to explain but hesitated mid-sentence, pausing as if he were selecting the right words. Until he finally said, "It was what she told me. It was kind of disturbing, but forget about it." Dad suddenly became discouraged, and while he continued driving, his expression became serious, and his gaze seemed heavy. He kept his eyes focused on the road ahead, which was very dark, and there wasn't much to see beyond the emptiness of the highway and some old posts scattered around. Silence dominated the car for a period, but I couldn't stay without finding out what had happened. So I leaned forward and asked directly, "What did Grandma tell you, Dad? Why do you think she was acting strangely?" That's when my mom joined the conversation. "Well, David, you can tell us too. It can't be anything too serious, considering she's just a sweet old lady." My dad didn't even blink, just had a slight tremor before finally starting to speak. "It happened on the eve of our departure. You and Marcus had gone upstairs to get ready for bed, and I was still relaxing in the living room chair. When I got up to go upstairs with you, Grandma appeared with a sinister smile on her face, staring at me in a disturbing way. I tried to let her know I was going to sleep, but that smile of hers hypnotized me. So I ended up sitting back down, thinking she was going to explain something to me. But she just stood there watching me with that diabolic smile. It gave me chills, but my body wouldn't respond. I understand. My nerves had frozen with terror. But nothing prepared me for when she suddenly stopped smiling. She opened her mouth, and with a deep voice, almost growling, pronounced these words. "Be careful on the roads tomorrow, David. They say most accidents happen during the early morning hours. It would be a tragedy if your beautiful wife and adorable son died because of an accident like that. Death is such a mysterious thing, don't you think, David? I wish we could all experience a little bit of it, just to know what it's like on the other side, or at least you who stay behind." After saying that, she simply left. My dad finished. We both fell into total silence for a while. I was so terrified that I didn't even know how to react, so I moved away as soon as I could move. But that malevolent smile seemed to follow me even when I went upstairs. When my dad finished telling the story, my heart clenched so tight with terror that I had to lean on the seat to keep from falling between the front seats where my parents were. My mom, meanwhile, turned white as a sheet of paper. The amused smile she had on her face completely disappeared. "Calm down, David. Don't worry about it. You know your mother would never say something like that seriously. It must be some side effect of the medications she's taking, or maybe you dreamed about it," said my mom, trying to lighten the heavy mood that had formed in the vehicle. But her empty words couldn't dispel that sinister and disturbing atmosphere that had taken over the environment. It was at that instant that my dad finally turned his head for a few seconds to try to reassure my mom with his gaze. And that's exactly when the road lights disappeared. We had already been driving for miles on a secondary road that would take us back to the main highway. The route passed through many miles of rural winter landscape, and the lighting from the posts had been getting weaker and weaker as we advanced, until we reached the point where the gradual decrease became a total drop, and we were almost in darkness. Besides the light from my mom's cell phone screen and our car's headlights, there was nothing else illuminating the way. Looking through the back seat window, I saw my dad's head turn quickly back to the road, and he immediately turned on the high beams. The stronger light managed to show us some things about reality that we normally can't see with normal post lighting. That's when we saw a silhouette standing right in front of us on the road. We all widened our eyes upon seeing that figure that didn't seem human and transmitted a dark and terrifying energy. Suddenly, the frightening creature lunged at our vehicle. By reflex, my dad swerved sharply, trying to avoid that enormous thing. When he did that, the tires made that noise on the asphalt, and all I remember is the car swaying violently until it stopped definitively after hitting a tree. Fortunately, we were all wearing seatbelts, which prevented anyone from getting seriously hurt. Even so, we were all in shock. We remained silent for a few moments, but the worst was yet to come. At that instant, my dad looked in the rearview mirror and could see a figure approaching in the darkness. He tried to start the car to get out of there, but the vehicle was too damaged from the crash. Quickly, my mom unbuckled my seatbelt and pulled me against her, completely desperate and trembling, while my dad grabbed some tool from the car and prepared to face whatever was coming in our direction. At that moment, we could hear the footsteps approaching, while panic took hold of everyone in the car, especially my mom, who had started crying in desperation. The steps were getting closer and closer. They seemed to be right on top of us. They were heavy and strong, and the way the thing moved gave the impression of being some kind of wild animal. Suddenly, this figure appeared in front of the driver's window and started banging on the glass. My dad became so terrified that he completely froze, unable to move, while my mom and I closed our eyes tightly, waiting for the worst. When suddenly we heard someone with a very gruff voice say, "We're not from Earth." All three of us lost our color immediately. Terror dominated us completely until I finally had the courage to turn my head and could see a man standing next to my dad's window. He was a completely normal person who was waving to get our attention. That's when my dad finally managed to move and opened the window a little to hear what he had to say. "Hi folks, are you all right?" the man asked in a friendly way. Our fears began to diminish. The guy seemed to be a good person, so we decided to get out of the car. The first thing we noticed was that he was tall and quite strong. My dad began explaining what had happened and then asked, "Sorry, but I need to know, what were you doing standing in the middle of the road at this hour of the morning?" We all looked at him with curiosity while we waited for the tow truck to arrive. That's when the man responded, standing in the middle of the road. "No, sir, I was driving behind you when I saw you lose control of the vehicle. You went off the road toward the woods and hit the tree. I was so focused on the accident that I didn't even pay attention to what was on the road before coming to help you." We were all speechless at what he said. If it hadn't been him, then it meant the creature we saw in the middle of the road was real. But what was that thing? Could it have some connection to Grandma's sinister words? My parents looked at each other with an expression of deep horror on their faces. Once again, they both grabbed me by the arms and hugged me tight. The thing or person that made us swerve continued to be a mystery, and to tell the truth, we didn't feel safe at all. We didn't want to stay in that place any longer. Fortunately, the tow truck didn't take long to appear. After about half an hour of waiting, the man who helped us said goodbye, and we finally left that place. That experience marked us deeply, and we never managed to completely forget what we experienced that haunted Dawn. Grandma's prophetic and disturbing words echoed in our minds for a long time afterward, mixed with the memory of that inexplicable apparition that came out of nowhere on the dark road. To this day, whenever I pass by an isolated road during the night, I feel a chill and remember that terrifying encounter that almost cost us our lives. This experience marked me deeply and happened during a business trip about 18 years ago. At the time, I was an employee of a company that maintained a branch office near the Canadian border in Washington state. My duties frequently took me there to train the local team, and being single and young, I was always excited about these opportunities to travel and earn extra income. Usually I traveled by plane, but on that specific occasion, I needed to transport heavy equipment and opted to make the journey by car. That day, our company had acquired a large quantity of equipment and various materials. And as usual, I volunteered to drive the vehicle to the office in Washington and return by plane later. Normally, I used a corporate car or a smaller pickup truck, but this time I felt more comfortable with a larger vehicle. I always preferred to start these trips in the late afternoon because I really enjoy driving at night. The traffic is lighter and the environment becomes more relaxing. In general, everything was proceeding normally until that point. I had made only a few stops at gas stations and rest areas when I needed a break. However, near the border between California and Oregon, at approximately midnight, the entire atmosphere changed drastically. I stopped at a rest area that seemed to be the last one before the state border. Looking around, I spotted some truckers parked, but most of the place was deserted. It's normal to have few vehicles at this hour, so I didn't find anything abnormal about the situation. I got out of the vehicle to use the restroom facilities and took the opportunity to breathe the fresh night air and stretch my legs a bit. When I returned, I noticed there was a car parked exactly next to my pickup truck, even with the entire rest of the parking lot empty. I found it peculiar, but didn't give it much importance, and returned to the vehicle to continue the trip. However, several miles ahead, I noticed the vehicle began to exhibit anomalous behavior. The interior lights started flickering intermittently. Soon after, all the dashboard lights, tail lights, and headlights went out completely. It was approximately 12:30 in the morning, and I was crossing a densely forested region in southern Oregon. Instead of feeling fear, I was overtaken by intense frustration as I drove at low speed. I couldn't believe my bad luck. Stressed, I hit the dashboard with my fist and yelled at the vehicle. Like a miracle, all the lighting returned to function. I decided it would be prudent to make a stop at the next rest area. The adrenaline was causing me to need the bathroom again, so as soon as I arrived, I jumped out of the pickup truck and headed quickly to the facilities. This time I didn't take long, and when I came out, I thought it might be wiser to wait for dawn to continue the journey. But as I approached my vehicle again, I spotted an elderly man, corpulent and with graying hair, leaning against the pickup truck. There was no other car visible nearby, so I assumed he was already at the location when I arrived. When I approached, he started a conversation about the weather conditions. A light snowfall was beginning to fall, though nothing that would accumulate significantly. I didn't pay much attention to the conversation, because my first impression was that he was just a lonely old man looking to socialize. But I wasn't in the mood for that. Then suddenly he said something that gave me chills. The man fixed his gaze on my vehicle and commented, "You're having mechanical problems." I stopped immediately. I felt like my entire body had frozen and blood rushed to my head. I could only respond, "Yeah, it's not working properly. I stopped here just to use the bathroom." He smiled and without missing a beat continued, "Ah, I understand. Well, I don't live very far from here, so if you'd like, you can come have some hot coffee or maybe rest on my couch for a while. You know, to recover your energy and continue the trip." At that instant, something inside me triggered an alert. He was being cordial, but the fact that he was inviting me to his residence, without knowing me in the slightest, made me very uncomfortable. Despite his courteous attitude, this invitation seemed completely inappropriate and immediately caused me great distrust. It was 2 in the morning in an isolated area, and even though I was tired and certainly having vehicle problems, I decided to politely decline the offer. I responded, "I appreciate it, but it won't be necessary. It's better to get back on the road before the snowfall intensifies." I noticed in his expression that my response disappointed him slightly, but he gave me a contained smile and said goodbye, waving as I walked away. I felt a heavy uneasiness settling over me. I kept checking the rearview mirror, fearful that the man would decide to follow me. But fortunately, he didn't. I continued driving with the feeling that the atmosphere had become oppressively dense. In my mind, it constantly echoed, what a strange situation that was. My thoughts returned to the previous stops, and suddenly I was assaulted by a terrible doubt. How did that man know I was having mechanical difficulties with the vehicle? This impression was becoming increasingly disturbing, and then I remembered the stop in California and the suspicious car parked next to mine. Was it possible that while I was in the bathroom, he had tampered with some component of my vehicle? Several miles later, my pickup truck was functioning normally, but I still felt uneasy. So I decided to stop at an establishment to refuel. In Oregon, only employees are authorized to dispense fuel. I waited while an attendant filled the tank, and during the wait, I considered examining the vehicle for signs of sabotage, since this suspicion wouldn't leave my thoughts. I walked around the pickup truck, and near the front fender, I observed some stains that I didn't remember seeing before. I tried to convince myself that my mind was playing tricks on me, that these marks didn't mean anything, but the discomfort persisted. When the employee finished refueling, I returned to the vehicle. However, just as I was leaving the station, I noticed there was a car parked in the corner of the lot with a man inside watching me. It was dark, and I couldn't distinguish the person's features, but my mind started racing again. Although I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia, the vehicle seemed remarkably similar to the one I had seen at the rest stop in California. Could it be the same elderly man I had encountered at the last stop? Was he following me? At that moment, a kind of panic settled in my chest. Maybe he was waiting for the right opportunity to sabotage my pickup truck. As I continued the trip, the snowfall intensified, adding an extra layer of concern to the already tense situation. I hadn't grown up in a region where snow was common, so although I had some experience driving in these conditions, I wasn't sure about when it would become dangerous. Looking in the rearview mirror, I noticed a pair of headlights following me. It was peculiar because normally cars would pass me at high speed, but this person simply maintained my pace. I was traveling well below the speed limit, and still they stayed behind me. Occasionally, they would position themselves beside me as if to pass, but then return to the previous position. This situation was making me progressively more nervous. I didn't know who this driver was or what their intentions were, but their behavior was excessively suspicious and disturbing. Now I was approaching Portland, Oregon, and even with the light snowfall, the nighttime darkness made everything more threatening. I decided I needed to make another stop, hoping the car following me would go away. I took the next exit and spotted a gas station with a police cruiser parked at the entrance. That was like breathing fresh air in the midst of all the tension I was experiencing. Without hesitation, I parked next to the cruiser and got out quickly. There was an officer present, a woman, and I started a conversation about the adverse weather conditions. The thought of mentioning the car following me briefly crossed my mind, but I felt embarrassed with the idea of saying, "Officer, I believe a mysterious elderly man is following me and may have sabotaged my pickup truck. I don't have evidence, but I have this suspicion." This would clearly sound ridiculous. So despite my apprehension, I preferred to avoid the subject. The officer was very kind and asked about my destination and origin. Naturally, I explained everything. While talking with her, I remained alert to the environment, expecting the man's car to appear, but there were no traces of it. The officer, noticing my uneasiness, suggested it would be prudent to stop for the rest of the night, and began explaining about the dangers of driving without adequate rest. She also mentioned that a few streets ahead, there was a small motel located behind another station. I accepted her advice. The fatigue and accumulated stress were beginning to affect me significantly. When I finally arrived at the establishment, I decided to park my pickup truck in the back part of the building, away from road visibility. I went quickly to the room and locked the door. Despite all the tiredness, I couldn't sleep properly. I remained watching television, dozing sporadically, startling at any external noise. My mind couldn't stop replaying the peculiar events from the California border to the encounter with the officer. And I reflected that perhaps the individual had observed my conversation with the police, which made him back off. But why would a stranger invite another stranger to his residence in the middle of the early morning in such a desolate area? And the most disturbing question, why did he ask about mechanical problems if he didn't know me? Everything seemed excessively peculiar to be mere coincidence. Finally, at 7 in the morning, I decided I'd had enough. I got up, had a proper breakfast, and checked out before continuing the journey to the office. Fortunately, nothing else anomalous occurred during the remaining route. However, the apprehension about that night continues to accompany me. You can consider me distrustful, but something inside me says I interrupted that man executing some action on my pickup truck at the Oregon rest stop. He was possibly part of a scheme to steal whatever items were in the truck bed. And although I'll never get a definitive answer, I'm convinced I avoided a potentially very dangerous situation. Since I was little, I never worried much about personal safety. I grew up in a quiet, welcoming small town where nothing bad ever happened. My dad always said jokingly that in Millbrook, a person could leave their house completely unlocked for weeks, and when they came back, they'd only find a little note from the neighbor saying the plants needed water. It wasn't carelessness. It was more of a natural trust in the world I'd known since childhood. When I left to study elsewhere and later moved to Cedar Valley, a residential area about an hour from Chicago, I continued with that same small-town confidence. I drove alone at night without thinking twice, stopped at unfamiliar gas stations, chose empty rural roads as shortcuts because they seemed calmer. I need to explain this so you understand how that night started completely ordinary. It was early October, one of those cold nights when you smell wet leaves and forest in the air. My best friend Helen had just moved to a house in a new subdivision on the outskirts of Cedar Valley, a place called Maple Ridge Estates. It was one of those newly built developments, with curved, gated streets and streetlights, so new they still smelled like fresh paint. Helen insisted I come to her housewarming party, even though it was midweek, and I had to work early at the clinic the next day. The party was nice and relaxed, just some old college friends drinking wine in the backyard, while soft music played on the stereo. Around 11:30, I looked at my phone and saw some missed calls from my boss. Nothing urgent, just schedule changes for the weekend, but it was enough to remind me of the next day's commitments. I said goodbye to Helen, hugged her, promised to come back to see the house properly during the day, and left for home. I should have slept there. The streets were much emptier than I expected. Maple Ridge Estates is right at the end of an area where new neighborhoods mix with farms and plantations. After leaving the organized rows of houses behind, I found myself driving on narrow two-lane roads, surrounded by open fields and dense lines of trees. Occasionally, a streetlight created a small area of yellowish light, but for most of the way, everything beyond my headlights was an endless black expanse. Normally, I don't feel bothered driving alone at night, but something in that silence made me tense. The low rumble of the engine, the constant movement of the windshield wipers removing moisture from the glass, everything sounded too loud, made me feel too exposed. I tried to convince myself it was just fatigue when my phone beeped warning that the battery was low. I realized I'd left in such a hurry that I forgot to connect the charger. I looked for the cable in the glove compartment and noticed it wasn't there. I'd definitely forgotten it in Helen's kitchen. Great, I thought to myself. The GPS app was still working, but with only 7% battery, I didn't want to risk being without directions in the middle of the route. Since I didn't know these rural roads well, I thought it wiser to stop quickly, check the route, and find the most direct path back to the main highway. I slowed down and spotted a small area of dirt road near the woods. There were no houses, no movement, just the dense wall of trees on the right side and huge fields spreading out on the left. I pulled over, kept the engine running, and grabbed the phone to check the route again. At that exact moment, there was a loud bang on my window. The shock was so great that the phone slipped from my hands and fell into the gap between the seats. My heart raced as I turned and found a woman standing outside. Her face was shining with tears, her dark hair was all disheveled, and her hands were dirty with what I hoped was just mud. She looked like she'd been running a long distance. "Help me, please," she begged through the glass, her voice all broken. I rolled down the window just a little bit. "What happened? Are you hurt?" I asked, automatically feeling that urge to help that I'd learned in small-town life. "My baby is hurt. She's bleeding badly. I don't have a phone. I need to get her to the hospital urgently." The woman's eyes were wide, desperate. She gestured frantically, pointing toward the trees behind her. "It's serious. I don't know what to do anymore." That's when I heard a high, distant moan coming from somewhere in the woods, baby crying. My stomach went cold immediately. The sound was strange, too weak, too repetitive, but when you're in panic, your senses get confused. I looked at the phone, now showing 5% battery. All my instincts screamed for me to stay inside the car, lock the doors, and call the police. But there was another part of me, that part raised with neighborhood values, that couldn't ignore a desperate mother asking for help for her child. "Okay," I responded, opening the door. "Let's go." I grabbed the phone and flashlight, following her toward the trees. The crying got louder as we went deeper into the woods. The sound echoed strangely. The air was heavy and humid, the soft ground under my sneakers. Every few steps, low branches grabbed at my jacket. "Where is she?" I shouted ahead. Very close now, her voice came floating back. I tried to keep her always in sight, but the trees seemed to swallow her silhouette. The darkness seemed to have a life of its own, surrounding me from all sides. A thin branch whipped across my leg, opening a cut on my skin. I let out a curse word under my breath and crouched down to examine the wound with the flashlight. It wasn't serious, just a shallow scratch. But when I raised my head again, she had completely disappeared. "Hey," my voice trembled, no response. Just that crying continuing somewhere ahead. I resumed walking, lighting the path between the trees. My heart was beating fast in my chest, the sound of my breathing echoing loud in my ear. That's when I saw it, a small, old baby blanket thrown on the forest floor. No baby, no woman, just a pile of what looked like animal bones arranged in a circle around the blanket. My stomach dropped. The air went cold. I spun around and took off running, with branches scratching my arms and face. I could hear heavy footsteps behind me, fast, getting closer and closer. I didn't have the courage to look back. When I reached the car, the driver's door was wide open. I was absolutely certain I hadn't left it that way. Panic completely took hold of me. I jumped inside, slammed the door shut, and locked everything. The keys had disappeared from the ignition. Oh my God, this can't be. I desperately searched the floor, the seats, all the compartments. Nothing. A voice murmured very close to the window. "Looking for these." I turned immediately. The woman was pressed against the glass with her face transformed into a cruel, supernatural expression, dangling my car keys. A siren started wailing in the distance. Headlights cut through the darkness between the trees. The woman's face flickered in the brightness and in a second had vanished. The rest is kind of foggy in my memory. The police said they found me trembling and crying inside the car with the driver's door completely open. They found no trace of the woman, no sign of a child, not even footprints in the wet ground. They explained it as stress, extreme fatigue, possibly confused with sounds from some animal lost in the woods. But I'm absolutely certain of what I witnessed that night. I left Cedar Valley 2 months after what happened, and since then, I've never stopped the car to help strangers on the road. Welcome back to another journey into the unknown. Before we begin, please subscribe, like the video, and tell me in the comments where you're from and what time you're listening. Now turn off the lights and try not to let fear take hold of you. There are things we only understand when it's already too late. Now, every time I see a rideshare car parked on the street at night, I remember what happened to me. That's why I'm telling this story before I sell my car and change professions forever. I've been working as a rideshare driver for 5 years. The overnight shift was always my favorite. Less traffic, higher fares, and the city becomes different after midnight. It was early November, when the city still holds the day's warmth, but at night releases a fog that makes everything look like a horror movie scene. That specific night, the app notified me that surge pricing was doubled in the downtown district near Millennium Park. The upscale bars had just closed, and I headed there hoping to pick up clients who pay well. That's when the request appeared. Pick up from the Palmer House Hotel, destination Graceland Cemetery. The fare would fill my tank, and it was just highway driving. I accepted immediately and drove to the hotel entrance. The doorman opened the door, and I watched the couple descend. He wore an impeccable black tuxedo. She was in a silver dress that sparkled under the marquee lights. Both had very pale skin, almost luminous. What caught my attention most was their perfume, flowers, but not fresh ones, rather that heavy scent of funeral wreaths. I found it strange, but my job isn't to judge customers. I unlocked the rear doors and grabbed my phone to take a quick photo of the hotel's sign. I always do this to prove where I picked up the ride in case there are problems later. They got in with total silence, each on their side. When the doors slammed shut together, I felt a strange sensation in my chest, as if the air had become heavier. I headed toward Lake Shore Drive and soon noticed something was different. Throughout the entire trip, they stared at each other without blinking even once. I tried to make conversation about the weather, but they didn't respond. I thought they were fighting and was relieved not to get involved in couple drama. But that silence was too perfect. The radio only picked up static until I found a station playing old jazz standards. The music spoke of promises that not even death could break, which gave me chills. I had already left the illuminated part of the city and was driving north on the old route to Graceland. The fog stuck to the windshield like ghosts. The GPS showed 15 minutes to the destination, and everything seemed normal except for one detail. My passengers' breathing never fogged the interior windows. I adjusted the rearview mirror to observe better. No vapor, no chest movement. The flower scent intensified when we passed the curve near Lincoln Park Zoo, now mixed with melted wax like a church after Mass. Since it was November 1st, I imagined they were going to some private wake, but there was something disturbing about how the woman held her purse. Her fingers were dirty with black soil. Without meaning to, I looked up and discovered they weren't looking at each other anymore. Now both were staring at the back of my neck. The app announced, "Turn right in 200 yards." I didn't see any exit, just a stone trail that entered the darkness. I turned slowly, the brakes making strange noises. The path was narrow, surrounded by trees that seemed to close over us. Dry branches cracked under the tires. Suddenly, the GPS froze and the blue dot stopped moving. On the map, the car appeared in a completely blank space. The trail opened into a clearing, and my headlights illuminated something that chilled me. Disorganized rows of wooden crosses without names driven into the earth. Extinguished candles scattered across the ground. It was an improvised cemetery, probably clandestine. I stopped the car immediately. "We've arrived," I announced without turning around. Absolute silence. I counted 3 heartbeats before hearing the door locks release. I wanted to turn to be polite, but something prevented me. I felt the rear seat becoming lighter. Both doors closed simultaneously again. When I finally managed to look back, the seats were empty. On the headrests, 2 bouquets of wilted flowers and wax stuck to the upholstery as if it had been dripping for hours. The most frightening thing was the left seatbelt. It remained buckled, taut, holding nothing. Childhood memories attacked me. Wakes, dead relatives, prayers. A cold rose from my feet. I got out of the car and walked to the crosses, following petals that glowed strangely in the dark. The first cross I touched had fresh wood, recently driven in. Robert Morrison, 1988 to 2022. The next, Carmen Silva, 1990 to 2022. They were the age of my passengers, but 3 crosses had the same death date. 2 white crosses stood out in the background. I ran back to the car. The stench of burned wax was suffocating. The flowers had turned to dust, and the upholstery was absorbing color, creating black stains. I drove out of there using memory of the curves until the GPS signal returned. The app reconnected with a cheerful tone, as if awakening from a nap. The history was clean. No trip since the Palmer House Hotel, no names, no fare, just emptiness. I arrived home at dawn and washed the seats with bleach, but the smell persisted. The stuck seatbelt wouldn't open no matter what. I took it to a shop, and the mechanic ripped out the buckle with a screwdriver. "Why is there cemetery dirt in here?" he asked. I left without answering. 2 nights later, the app assigned me the same trip, Palmer House Hotel to Graceland Cemetery. I canceled, but it reappeared. I deleted the app, but the icon returned after restarting my phone. The presences were looking for a driver. I returned to the hotel during the day to investigate. The doorman said there had been no party at all, ballrooms closed, due to the pandemic. I showed him the photo I had taken upon arrival. He paled when recognizing the couple in yellowed newspaper clippings. Young couple disappears after fire at underground party exactly 1 year ago on the route to Graceland. The names matched the crosses. I quit the night shift. Every dawn I find the car impregnated with the same odor. The new seatbelt locks at 11:38 p.m., exactly when I used to accept rides. I know that one day, if I'm driving at that time, the rear doors will open by themselves, and the cycle will begin again. That's why I'm selling everything and changing my life. If you drive at night and encounter a couple too perfect, without breathing or imperfections, know that it might be your turn to take them to the place where they attended their last party. Wax sticks more than blood. The dead don't always rest. And sometimes silence has the same sound as 2 doors closing when your ordinary car transforms into the vehicle that will take them home for the last time. Some things change our lives forever, even when we don't want to believe them. Today, when I see any rideshare car parked in the rain, I feel a chill in my stomach that reminds me why I stopped driving. This is the story of what happened to me and why I'll never accept another ride at night. My name is Diego. I'm 45 years old and I worked as a rideshare driver in Phoenix for 5 years. I always preferred the overnight shift because the city transforms completely when the movement stops. Traffic lights blink alone like electronic ghosts, and Camelback Road becomes a dark river that no one watches. The exhaustion is compensated by higher fares, and since most passengers stay quiet, there's time to think. I never imagined that one specific ride would stick in my memory like a scar that won't heal. On the early morning of October 18th, 2023, light rain was falling over the city. It was 2:14 a.m. when I received the request on the app. Pickup on Central Avenue in front of the old train station building. Destination marked as Devil's Canyon Overlook, a point without an official address in the mountains near the Salt River Gorge. The system offered extra fare because few drivers accept such remote regions. With rent bills tight, I tapped accept. The street was deserted except for a solitary figure standing under the drizzle. A woman with a closed umbrella and a long white dress stuck to her wet body held a bouquet of wilted flowers with her hands clasped at her waist. When I opened the rear door, she got in with slow movements, almost floating, without making noise. The door closing sounded like a sigh. Immediately, an intense aroma of incense took over the car, a mixture of copal with burnt ginger that made my eyes water. The map suggested crossing Scottsdale and following the highway toward Payson until finding a dirt road detour. I showed her the route, and she nodded in agreement. Even with little illumination from the dashboard, I noticed her skin was translucent, almost like wet marble. Her bare feet resting on the floor were dark with wet soil. The highway stretched empty ahead. The drizzle transformed the headlights into silver tunnels cutting through the darkness. The engine worked normally, but the silence between us grew like a bubble of tension. I tried to break the mood, going to some ceremony. She didn't respond or move, maintaining only that heavy fragrance mixed with the sound of rain on the windshield. On the phone screen, the car icon advanced along a line that progressively narrowed. We reached the indicated detour, a stone trail bordered by dense vegetation. The shock absorbers protested against holes and bumps. Fog began rising from the valley, dense like wet cotton, enveloping the car. Suddenly, the GPS lost signal, and the screen froze. I continued, guided only by headlights and the intuition to always go up. The asphalt gave way to open terrain covered with red mud. The rain stopped abruptly. Ahead, I could vaguely distinguish the rusted structure of the overlook and an old stone cross fallen sideways. I turned off the engine and silence became absolute. That's when she spoke for the first time. "Wait here, don't turn around." The voice was a hoarse whisper like dry leaves burning. She extended a folded bill in my direction. When our eyes met, I saw that hers were just milky cavities without pupils or irises, covered by a pale film. I nodded, saliva stuck in my throat. She got out and walked toward the overlook structure. With each step, it seemed the ground absorbed the moisture from her dress. The fog swallowed her silhouette until she disappeared completely. 10 minutes dragged by. 15 minutes. The silence was so intense it hurt my ears. I began wondering about the fare, whether I should honk, but curiosity, that inconvenient force that moves us at the wrong moments, dominated me. I turned toward the rear seat. It was impeccable and dry as if no one had sat there. Only a subtle line of mud on the carpet that seemed to dissolve while I watched. The bill she had given me was no longer in my hands. The door remained closed. I looked forward again. The fog formed an impenetrable wall. I turned on the high beams, but they revealed nothing beyond mist slowly spinning like thick smoke. A feeling of emptiness settled in my stomach. I tried starting the engine. It reluctant for several attempts, the battery emitting weak groans. When maneuvering the vehicle, I heard something breaking under the wheels, dark flowers crushed by the tire. Distant thunder echoed through the mountains, while the incense aroma intensified. The return trip passed like a blur without details. I only regained full consciousness when I passed the Fountain Hills toll booth, and the dashboard received signal again. A notification appeared on screen, trip completed. No passenger registered in system, technical failure obviously. I stopped at a well-lit gas station to check the car. The carpet was clean except for an almost imperceptible mark of dark soil. I accessed the dashboard camera recording to understand what had happened. I fast-forwarded to the pickup moment. The image showed the rear door opening by itself, remaining so for several seconds before closing. The seat appeared empty throughout the entire recording. My voice echoed, asking about ceremonies to the air. The obvious explanation was equipment malfunction, but something in my core rejected this logic. I arrived home at 4:44 a.m. The perfume persisted stronger than before. I used all the air freshener I had, but nothing could mask that odor. I slept only 3 hours before the alarm yanked me from drowsiness. Going down to check the car, I found a new smell, wet earth mixed with something putrid. On the rear seat was a $20 bill rolled like a small offering. I unrolled the paper and discovered a drawing made with dark ink. A cross on top of a hill, and below it, 2 empty circles representing eyes without pupils. The following nights became strange. The app rejected my attempts to take breaks, directing only rides to isolated destinations on the outskirts. A drunk customer asked me about the bride in white he saw in the seat beside him. An elderly lady commented that the car smelled like an old wake. With each occurrence, that fragrance returned. I kept the windows open constantly, but it always resurfaced. I hired a specialized cleaning company. The technician removed all the seats and found under the carpet reddish soil mixed with a tiny root that contracted when touched. He discarded all the material and applied chemical products. That night the air remained pure for a few seconds before the familiar aroma returned. I decided to research the location's history. According to old records, Devil's Canyon was a pre-Hispanic ceremonial site where women who died during childbirth were taken to assist the passage of infant souls. A local legend mentioned the White Lady of the Muddy Feet, a midwife who succumbed to puerperal fever, but continued appearing to guide lost spirits. Other versions spoke of a bride who was murdered in the gorge during a frustrated wedding ceremony. 10 days after that first experience, the platform assigned me another service. Origin, on Camelback Road, destination without specific address. The coordinates pointed to the base of Devil's Canyon, not to the overlook. The fare was tripled. Even with all the warning signs, financial pressure made me accept. I found the figure at the agreed location under more intense rain, same hood, same dress, but now carrying fresh white flowers. She entered without looking at me directly. During the journey, the radio activated spontaneously, transmitting Gregorian chant with female voices intoning phrases in Latin about perpetual light. The windshield fogged rapidly, while a metallic odor similar to oxidized blood mixed with the incense. The app traced a completely different route, taking us along a dirt road I had never seen in 5 years of driving the region. The car advanced without difficulty, even with the soaked ground transformed into deep mud. Through the rearview mirror, I watched her press the flowers against her chest. Streams of mud dripped from her feet, forming small streams that evaporated before touching the carpet. Without warning, the trail ended in a clearing where stood a ruined chapel built with dark volcanic stone. It had no door, just an opening that gave way to the void of the gorge. I stopped the vehicle. The engine coughed several times before falling completely silent. The interior lights went out by themselves. Outside, the fog dissipated like a curtain being lifted, revealing the abyss illuminated by intermittent lightning. She spoke again, now with a clear voice that echoed as if coming from an underground tunnel. "Don't follow me." She got out and walked toward the destroyed chapel. I made the mistake of watching her movements. The bare feet muddy to the ankles left footprints that disappeared moments later. When she crossed the chapel entrance, the interior lit up with pale, trembling flames. Among the blazes, I distinguished human silhouettes lined up, uniformed drivers with identification plates on their chests, all motionless like statues. Their faces were smooth, reflective surfaces like fogged mirrors. I tried to scream, but the air solidified in my throat. The next lightning revealed her face with terrible clarity. Smooth, white skin without any expression, just two deep holes where eyes should be. She raised the bouquet above her head. The flames licked the petals that transformed into aromatic vapor. The driver mannequins bowed in unison like marionettes, responding to the same command. I understood immediately. Each driver who had transgressed her rules had left a reflection imprisoned, a submissive echo destined to serve eternally. She stared at me through those abyssal voids, and the air recovered movement. A voice that I don't know if she pronounced or if it sprouted from my own mind whispered, "Soon." I returned to the car stumbling. The key turned easily, and the engine came to life instantly. The app screen restarted, showing destination reached, fare 0. I drove back without looking once in the rearview mirror. When the sun rose over Phoenix, the routine noise of the city swallowed every trace of that nightmare. Since then, I don't touch the steering wheel of any vehicle. I transferred my car to the company, but the fragrance persisted even after the sale. My apartment rejects any source of natural light, and during rains, muddy footprints appear extending from the front door to my bed. I sleep only for short periods, always with the television on to muffle the silence where terrestrial footsteps echo. I discovered online forums full of similar reports. Drivers who transported the Devil's Canyon entity developed the same olfactory syndrome before simply disappearing. Months later, their vehicles are found abandoned with interiors impeccably clean. I imagine they joined that silent congregation in the burning chapel, new servants for the lady who seeks transport in rainy dawns. That's why I leave this record as a final warning. Your life may depend on following these rules. If you receive a request for mountainous regions shrouded in fog, and your passenger wears white clothing, never observe her muddy feet. Never direct your gaze to the rearview mirror. If she requests that you wait, obey without questioning. The moment the door closes behind her, leave immediately, even if it means losing payment. Because once you break those simple rules, and your eyes meet that primordial void, your reflection will be imprisoned forever in that black stone chapel. You'll continue driving through the city streets, but completely hollow inside, exhaling perfumes of the dead, counting the days until the next storm when someone will notice that your eyes, exactly like hers, no longer reflect absolutely anything. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.